Chapter 191. Everything is for the Qing Kingdom. Everything for Qing Kingdom? Yuan Hongdao sat in the carriage, heading toward the eldest princess fief of Xinjiang. In his heart, he felt the absurdity of the words he had kept in the depths of his heart for so many years. Many years ago, when the eldest princess began to like the prime minister, Yuan Hongdao, as one of the first secret members of the Second Bureau of the Overwatch Council, accepted Chen Pingping's arrangements. He had a new identity and a new life. Gradually, he became good friends with Lin Ruofu, who at the time was not very prominent. At that time, it was just a chance encounter between two scholars. Back then, Lin Ruofu had been high-spirited and vigorous, while Yuan Hongdao had been steady and honest. After experiencing all sorts of coincidences arranged by the council, they had finally become so-called close friends. As the years passed, Lin Ruofu, with the support of the eldest princess, had a smooth journey in the officialdom. Yuan Hongdao, on the other hand, was willing to stay by Lin Ruofu's side as an informant. Even when Lin Ruofu hinted countless times that he could make Yuan Hongdao an official, he only smiled faintly and refused. Because of this, Lin Ruofu regarded him as the only true friend in his life. It was just that the prime minister didn't expect this friend of his to be carrying another mission from the very beginning. Yuan Hongdao had actually gradually adapted to this kind of life because the council had never given him any missions, and the few people who knew his identity had always kept their distance. During these years, the only thing Yuan Hongdao had helped the Overwatch Council do was help the second young master Lin of the Tsang mountainside courtyard lie after he had been killed and framed Dongi for the Overwatch Council. Lin Ruofu believed him because he was the one who said it. Yuan Hongdao had only betrayed Lin Ruofu once in his life, and it was enough for the prime minister to dejectedly withdraw from the court. This was the emperor's will. Through the Overwatch Council, he was told to carry it out. Perhaps the betrayal of his old friend had made the prime minister see the world clearly, so the next day he could not be stopped from entering the palace. He even turned a blind eye to Fan Jian's repeated hints. As for the future of the Lin family, the prime minister had placed all his hopes on his son-in-law, Fan Xian. Naturally, he did not want to drag his in-laws into this mess. In the middle of the third month, the minister of the Board of Rights, Guai Yu, died, and the minister of the Board of Punishments, Han Jiwei, was demoted. The prime minister asked for forgiveness and retired. His Majesty tried to persuade him to stay, but to no avail. All of the imperial censorate's actions regarding Wu Boan's case had disappeared, and Lady Wu's whereabouts were unknown. His Majesty had decreed that He Zhongwei was talented and virtuous. He was to enter the palace and be rewarded. He was exempted from the examination and appointed as the imperial censor. Why? Fan Xian sat in the carriage and gently flicked the piece of paper in his hand. This was a report from the Overwatch Council regarding the developments in the court. As the commissioner, although he was far away on the northern border, he had only received the news from Jingdo a few days later than other places. Of course, his father-in-law was not a good official in the purest sense of the word. He was not called a treacherous prime minister for nothing, but Fan Xian still felt that it was absurd. He was the prime minister of a country, and yet he had been silently defeated in the bureaucratic struggle of the Qing kingdom. Fan Xian had to think about the future. Although it seemed that his father-in-law, the prime minister, had not been of much help to him in the past year, he knew that the reason the civil officials of the court had always been patient with him, including the spring examination case, was because of his father-in-law. Other than the two ministers who had already fallen, Fan Xian had never encountered a real challenge in the bureaucracy of the Qing kingdom. Fan Xian's question was directed at Xiao En, who was chained and unable to dance. Why? Xiao En analyzed coldly. Because you made a move. The emperor of the Qing kingdom took the opportunity to weaken the power of the civil officials. But how could just two ministers satisfy the emperor's appetite? You are the son-in-law of the prime minister, and your reputation has spread far and wide. If the emperor really wants you to take charge of the Overwatch Council in the future, then for the sake of safety, the prime minister must quickly step down. As for how to step down, Xiao En laughed mockingly. If an emperor wants an official to step down, there are countless ways. Besides, your emperor has always been a strange man who likes to use the Overwatch Council. The reason why the emperor of the Qing kingdom was a strange man was because the Overwatch Council was too powerful, and yet the emperor still trusted Chen Pingping. This was an anomaly. Fan Xian shook his head. There is something strange about this case. Even if my father-in-law was pained by the death of my second brother, He had many ways to make Wu Bo and die without descendants. As for the assassination of Lady Wu in the capital, it just so happened that the second prince and Li Hongqing ran into each other. Such a foolish method is far from my father-in-law's ability. There is a traitor at the prime minister's side, Xueqi said lightly. As for whether it is the eldest princess's people or your emperor's people, in truth, it makes no difference. Fan Xian wasn't sure. To be able to force my father-in-law to step down, there must be concrete evidence. My father-in-law is a cautious man. How could he allow a spy from a hostile power to come into contact with such important matters? He had no idea that the one who had betrayed his father-in-law was that Mr. Yuan Hongdao, and he had no idea that the Overwatch Council was behind this. Xueqi laughed with some satisfaction. How much do you, young man, know about what is hidden in the darkness? He had the right to say this. Back then, the civil strife in the kingdom of Qing had been orchestrated by this old man. If not for the sudden deaths of the two princes, perhaps the kingdom of Qing would no longer exist. Fan Xian's eyelids twitched. In his conversations with Xueqi these past few days, he had discovered that although he had been imprisoned for many years and did not know the distribution of power in the kingdom of Qing, Xueqi could clearly see where the problem lay when Fan Xian explained it to him. He had even guessed exactly what kind of punishment the officials involved would receive in the spring examination case. Xueqi had once said that the prime minister would step down because of this. But there had been no warning, and the spring examination case did not involve the prime minister's manor. The eldest princess, who had a broken relationship with the prime minister, was far away in Xinjiang, so Fan Xian did not believe him. Unexpectedly, Xueqi had guessed correctly. Fan Xian couldn't help but be shocked at the old man's vicious insight. Only now did he realize that his reputation was well-deserved. Fan Xian sighed. Looking at the old man, he suddenly said, "I'm more and more curious. Why didn't the Overwatch Council kill you immediately after they caught you?" "Because I have a lot of useful things in my head." "Then at least they could have been more ruthless," said Fan Xian. "Like cutting off your 5 limbs. What do you mean by 5 limbs? Xueqi was a little curious. Everything has a bottom line. When things exceed the bottom line I can endure, I think at least I still have the ability to kill myself. But you are not willing to pay that price. Fan Xian raised his eyebrows in thought. This was indeed the case. He got up and saluted him, then got out of the carriage. He stood next to the carriage, looking at the fresh reeds floating by the lake in the distance. He vaguely understood the emperor's true meaning. The court needed new blood. As the saying goes, flowing water never rots. The prime minister had been in his position for too long. Fan Xian's sudden rise in the capital made the matter of the prime minister's removal even more urgent. There was no noble in the palace who would allow the prime minister, the head of all officials, to have a son-in-law in charge of the Overwatch Council. If the emperor really wanted to put Fan Xian in an important position in the coming year, then the prime minister had to leave. Otherwise, Fan Xian would be suppressed. But Fan Xian knew that the unfamiliar emperor would not truly suppress him. If Fan Xian was the wave at the back, then the prime minister was the powerless spray at the front. He had to bid farewell to the stage of history and make room for himself. This was a very normal process in officialdom. Seeing that the prime minister had left in a carefree manner, it seemed that he had long since anticipated the end of the story. But Fan Xian thought of Wan'er, who had stayed behind in the capital, and of that silly Debao whom he had somehow gotten along with. He still felt a little worried, and a faint worry crept into his brow. I hope father and Chen Pingping can protect the rest of the Lin family. He frowned as he looked at the yellow reeds. Why did they refuse to turn green? His heart suddenly thumped, and he began to think about the role of the Overwatch Council in this matter. Inexplicably, Fan Xian felt a trace of anger. As the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, he did not believe that the council did not know of the emperor's intentions. And then he thought of the poison in Sea Lily's body, and he suddenly felt a little cold. Chen Pingping was only constantly removing obstacles in Fan Xian's way, even if they were Fan Xian's family. This method of removal was unusually cold, unusually heartless, and did not even consider Fan Xian's feelings. In the afternoon, after many days of travel, the diplomatic mission finally approached the Great Lake at the border between the two countries. The Great Lake had no name. It was simply called the Great Lake because it was exceptionally large. Fan Xian looked at the rolling blue waves in front of him, and as the cool breeze blew across the surface of the lake, he became much more clear-headed. A bright and beautiful smile once again appeared on his face. Although the diplomatic missions convoy had already arrived at the Great Lake, it would still take several days to circle around the lake and truly enter the borders of northern Qi. Fan Xian knew that if Xiao En was truly going to make a move, it would probably be in the next few days. In the distance, there were water birds flying leisurely close to the surface of the lake, their long beaks gliding through the water. When they encountered a fish, they nimbly closed their beaks and flew to the lakeshore. Then, using their slender claws, they would step on the fish, raise their necks to the sky, and swallow them with a gulp. It looked incredibly relaxed and carefree. Fan Xian's heart suddenly skipped a beat, and he strode toward the carriage that he had not visited in many days. Lifting the curtain and entering, he looked at Sea Lily, who had a slightly stunned expression on her face, and smiled. Chapter 192. Do you want to live on? Sea Lily was startled. She looked at Fan Xian, who she hadn't seen for many days, and didn't know what to think. Hearing this abrupt question, she felt even more baffled. She smiled slightly. Even ants are greedy for life, not to mention a slave. Fan Xian didn't like hearing her call herself a slave, but she insisted on calling herself a slave. She was still a young girl. After all, she wasn't a truly ruthless spy. The carriage moved forward again. With a slight jolt, he was sitting next to Sea Lily. Sea Lily moved to the side imperceptibly, as if to keep some distance from him. Fan Xian frowned. There's poison in your body. I believe you don't know this. Sea Lily's clear eyes stared into Fan Xian's. After a long silence she faintly said, Is it true? You don't seem very surprised. I got out of prison alive this time. What could I be surprised about? Sea Lily sighed with a hint of self-mockery. It was a very seductive sigh. Sir Fan Jr. is skilled in using poison. Since you say there's poison in my body, it must be true. The Overwatch Council of the Kingdom of Qing always has a way to control me. I guessed this a long time ago. Fan Xian looked at the beautiful face of this woman and didn't speak for a long time. Since entering the capital, when it came to beauty, none of the women he had seen could compare to Sea Lily. This is not a way to control you, Fan Xian explained with a smile. It's a way to deal with the Emperor of Northern Qi. Sea Lily could no longer pretend to be calm. She covered her mouth in shock. After a long moment she anxiously said, What do you mean? Fan Xian looked at her reaction. For some reason, he felt a faint sense of discomfort. Although he had guessed her reaction, once he realized that the young emperor still held a certain importance in Sea Lily's heart. He smiled slightly and recovered his calm. This poison will pass through your body and infect the Emperor of Northern Qi. Sea Lily stared into his eyes. Suddenly she bit her lip and said hatefully, Why are you telling me this? Because I know you want to change this matter before you achieve your goal. Fan Xian smiled warmly. So I hope you can tell me exactly what method Chen Pingping used to control you. Sea Lily fell silent and didn't answer his question. Instead she smiled like a flower and said, Fine, fine. Since Master Fan has already told me, I will go to Shangjing and find a way to cure the poison. Thank you very much. Fan Xian smiled mockingly. Although this poison is not strong, other than me, probably only the royal physicians in the palace have the means to cure it. Are you going to tell the royal family of Northern Qi that you have this poison in your private parts? If you really do this, no matter how much affection the Northern Qi Emperor has for you, I'm afraid you will never be able to enter the royal palace. Sea Lily stubbornly said, So what if I don't enter the palace? The worst that can happen is that the House of Red Sleeves plan of the Overwatch Council goes bankrupt. What does that have to do with me? Fan Xian finally became angry and yelled, I've said it before, I don't like the word servant. For some reason, the rims of Sea Lily's eyes reddened. She looked at Fan Xian and gritted her teeth. But in your heart, am I not inferior to even a servant? Fan Xian looked at the beautiful face of the red-haired woman, and his brows furrowed even tighter. He wanted to know what she was thinking deep in her heart. After a while he quietly said, I think Miss C understands the current situation. Your life, at least for now, is not something you can completely control. As for what happens in the future, that is a matter for the future. Besides, I don't think you've ever thought of those ridiculous things. Ridiculous things? Sea Lily looked at him with a cold smile. Yes, they are indeed ridiculous. Master and I are only a man and a woman who meet by chance on the road of life. Using each other is more real and reliable than being warm to each other. I am very happy that you understand this, Fan Xian replied calmly. Why are you so curious about the agreement between me and Chen Pingping? Xi Lili stealthily turned around and wiped the corner of her eyes with the corner of her clothes. She immediately regained her composure and smiled like a blooming flower. You are the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. You should know the details of the House of Red Sleeves. Fan Xian laughed at himself. I know the plan of the House of White Sleeves very well. I just don't know how Director Chen convinced you. He paused and said, since you know you are only a pawn used by Chen Pingping to spread the poison, why don't you tell me the whole story? What good would it do me if I told you? Xi Lili forced herself to be calm. Looking at the young handsome face in front of her, her heart itched with hatred. She didn't know why, but during this short journey, she had gradually become infatuated with the innocent smile that occasionally appeared on his face. But when she thought of his cold and heartless words, hatred rose in her heart. She said coldly, what Chen Pingping can give me, can you give me? Chen Pingping is old. I am still young. After saying this, both Fan Xian and Xi Lili felt that it was inappropriate. This was supposed to be a serious negotiation of benefits, but it seemed to have a hint of flirtation. What Chen Pingping can give me, can you give me? Chen Pingping is old. I am still young. The faint smell of massed flowers permeated the carriage. Fan Xian coughed twice, and Xi Lili's face flushed for a moment before disappearing. The man and the woman had something up their sleeves. Otherwise, they would not have become so embarrassed over such a simple conversation. Xi Lili rolled her eyes. She seemed to understand this as well. It seemed that Fan Xian still had feelings for her. She couldn't help but smile proudly and bashfully. Fan Xian coughed again and explained, actually, I can guess one thing. You must have a big plan, but Chen Pingping is already old. Perhaps in 2 years he will die. If you are willing to cooperate with me, I think the chances of success will be higher. Xi Lili was a little angry, but she suppressed her anger. After thinking it over, she said, Master Fan, you still haven't told me what I can get out of it. I will cure you of the poison. Once I take control of the Overwatch Council, I will use the power of the North to help you climb up the ranks in the Northern Qi Palace. Xi Lili shook her head and laughed coldly. We are separated by borders. Although the Kingdom of Qing is powerful, and the secret agents of the Overwatch Council are powerful, they can't reach into the Northern Qi Palace. And who told you that I want a position in the Northern Qi Palace? Fan Xian was speechless. Suddenly, Xi Lili's eyes flashed. She waved her hand, as if she were calling a pet. She smiled charmingly. Come closer, sir. This cannot be heard by others. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. He knew that this woman wanted to vent her anger at being ignored these past few days. He smiled and moved his ear closer. Before he could hear a sound, he felt a warm breath on his earlobe. His heart warmed, and he smelled the faint fragrance of her body. He was immediately shocked by what happened next. After a long time, the young man and woman separated. Xi Lili looked at Fan Xian with a smile that wasn't quite a smile. She said quietly, I took a risk to tell Master Fan about this agreement. Dare I ask, sir, can you help me complete this agreement? Fan Xian's brows furrowed like mountains and rivers. He still hadn't shaken off the shock. He shook his head. I don't believe it. Who is Chen Pingping? Even if he had such thoughts, he wouldn't tell you. Xi Lili said mockingly, even you don't believe it. Of course he isn't afraid of me telling others. Anyway, no one in the world would believe that old cripple had such thoughts. Fan Xian pondered for a moment and understood the whole story. He smiled. So that's how it is. He looked at Xi Lili and suddenly said, in the early years, there was a rumor in the capital that Miss Xi was the grandchild of some royal family at the beginning of the country. The people of the capital thought it was just a way for you to raise your social status. Now it seems. It is true. Xi Lili slowly closed her eyes. After a long time she said quietly, my real name is Li Lizi. Fan Xian smiled and looked at her smooth chin. He couldn't help but gently rub his fingers. He sighed. No wonder the Emperor of Northern Qi doesn't care about your identity. No wonder you were willing to be used by Chen Pingping. But I have to advise you. You are a girl. Compared to those sinister old snakes, You are too tender. Be careful. If you can settle down in the palace of Northern Qi, first let go of your plans with Chen Pingping and ignore him. Si Lily looked into his eyes. She was a little surprised and a little warm. She smiled sweetly. Thank you for your concern, sir. But I have already told you the contents of the agreement. When will you cure me? Fan Xian smiled. Starting tomorrow, I need to prepare some materials. Also, after this diplomatic mission, I will think of a way to take over from the council. The safety of your brother, or more accurately, the Crown Prince. Please do not worry. Under my watch, the Crown Prince will not sneak into the kingdom of Qing from Northern Qi again. Si Lily was silent. She stood up in the narrow carriage and with great difficulty, curtsied to Fan Xian. In the carriage in front of them, Shaowen's white hair was tied up tightly like steel thorns. The old man sat silently in a chair, his hands in a strange position, like a lotus flower about to bloom. The pinky of his left hand was slightly curled up, pressed against the edge of the toilet bowl. The strong zhenqi in Shaowen's body slowly began to circulate. A faint fishy smell covered up the strange smell in the carriage. A drop of thick black liquid was forced out of his meridians, which were gradually recovering. It flowed along the tip of his pinky and slowly into the toilet bowl. Chapter 193. After that drop of concentrated venom slid into the toilet bowl, the light in Shaowen's eyes gradually brightened. His hands clasped together and made another gesture, gradually calming the chaotic flow of zhenqi in his body. In the Overwatch Council, he had always been tortured and poisoned. The bald former head of the 7th Bureau understood his physical condition very well, so he had a good sense of propriety in his actions. He had always allowed Xiao En to wander around the edges. After leaving the capital, Fan Xian's methods were even more tyrannical, directly injecting poison into his veins. This caused Xiao En's bodily functions to be greatly damaged. But just like what Fei Jie had said to Fan Xian when he was young, the key to using poison was still in the word, go. It did not necessarily mean that the stronger the poison, the better the effect. After all, Fan Xian lacked the experience of dealing with a special case like Xiao En. He didn't seem to realize that after 20 years of torture, Xiao En's body had already contained hundreds of different kinds of poisons. These poisons had formed a certain balance in his body, preventing him from dying, and preventing him from finding a way to expel the poison with zhenqi. But this time, what Fan Xian had used was like a mountain-splitting axe, chopping into the intricate knots. Although the knots brought Xiao En great pain when they broke, it also gave this powerful figure, who had immersed himself in the art of poison for decades, a chance to undo them. Xiao En's lips curled up slightly. His dry lips, set off by his snow-like hair, looked very frightening. Suddenly, the cold light in his eyes faded, and his whole body slumped. He immediately seemed much older, but his body still exuded the smell of an old man. The carriages slowly came to a stop and began to look for a suitable place to set up camp by the lake. The black knights in the distance swept past the diplomatic mission like a cold wind, sweeping forward and then returning to their ranks. Wang Qinian took out a key from outside and opened the well-sealed iron gate. He walked in with a respectful expression, helped Xiao En eat some food and water, and carefully helped him tidy up his face with a wet towel. Finally he asked, "Do you want to comb your hair today?" Xiao En shook his head. A cold light flashed in his eyes, but it weakened. In a slightly hoarse voice he asked, "When will Master Fan be coming today?" He was asking about Fan Xian's daily injections of poison. Wang Qinian smiled slightly and replied, "We are not far from the border. What Sir Fan Jr. means is that Sir Xiao can be spared from daily suffering." Xiao En's face did not show the slightest hint of joy. He simply closed his eyes and asked, "I hear that Master Fan will be in charge of the kingdom of Qing's palace treasury next year?" Wang Qinian thought it was Fan Xian who had told him, so he didn't mind. He smiled and said, "Yes, that's the richest place in the world." "Are they richer than the Yi family?" Xiao En's lips curled into a contemptuous smile. Wang Qinian was startled and immediately thought of this unfamiliar name. He smiled and said, "The Yi clan has long since dispersed." "What?" Xiao En seemed to have thought of something. There was a look of shock in his eyes, but he quickly hid it. Seeing that he didn't have anything else to say, Wang Qinian secretly let out a sigh of relief. He took out the toilet bowl from under the chair and got off the carriage. Wang Qinian covered his nose and carried the toilet bowl to the camp on the other side of the carriages. When he reached the centermost tent, he put the toilet bowl down and grumbled, "Such an old man, and yet he still poops so much all day long." After being locked up for 20 years, his body can still recover so quickly. I'm beginning to wonder if this old man is even human. Fan Xian smiled and turned around. He walked to Wang Qinyan's side and opened the lid of the toilet bowl. He frowned slightly and said, "It stinks. This move really stinks." In the magnificent Li Palace in Xinyang, the white curtains swayed in the gentle spring breeze. In the early spring weather, the Li Palace was unexpectedly cold. The palace was filled with winter plum blossoms, very similar to the Guangxin Palace in the imperial palace of the capital. Behind the white curtains, a gentle and timid woman reclined on a low couch smiled sweetly as she looked at her trusted aide, who was currently placing a chess piece. This trusted aide's surname was Huang Yi. His name was ordinary, but he was a very scheming person. Hearing the eldest princess's words, he calmly smiled and said, "In front of the eldest princess, even the world's top players can only play lousy chess pieces." "Not necessarily." Eldest Princess Li Yunrui's delicate and pretty face floated before her eyes, and she laughed for no reason. "That child is a clever person. Don't think that the reason he is so successful is entirely because Fan Jian is close to my brother the emperor. I still don't understand. Why does Chen Pingping like my good son-in-law so much?" Huang Yi shook his head and reached out to pat his thigh. "There's no way to explain it. If I insist on an explanation, I can only guess that His Majesty likes Fan Xian. My brother the emperor likes that girl Chen. It's possible that he loves her because of her. Furthermore, Fan Xian is both a scholar and a martial artist. He has one face for my brother the emperor." The eldest princess smiled weakly. It's a pity that he thinks he's clever, but in the end, he still made a lousy move. The rear of the diplomatic mission circled around those small vassal states. On the surface, it seemed much safer, but in reality, the vast grasslands and vast lakes were the best places to escape. According to reports, the Black Knights are there. I also know that. The eldest princess smiled. So it's up to Xiao En whether or not he can escape. Why would Xiao En want to escape? Huang Yi frowned in thought. According to the agreement between the eldest princess and Shang Shanhu, as long as Xiao En can return home and make a comeback, the court, master and disciple will join forces. There is a 40% chance that they can overthrow the royal family of Northern Qi. Xiao En is not easy to control. Just like Chen Pingping. The eldest princess smiled. If he returns to the north, he will be completely under the control of the royal family of Northern Qi. Perhaps he will be imprisoned for another 20 years, until he dies of old age. He will not be of any help to our plan with Shang Shanhu. I gave up my own reputation and that poor official Yan Bingyun in exchange for Xiao En's freedom. Only then will Shang Shanhu fulfill his promise. I will not allow anyone to ruin this. What if Shang Shanhu goes back on his word? He is, after all, a great general of Northern Qi. Would Xiao En be willing to throw his life away for Northern Qi? And if I make a move, even if Shang Shanhu doesn't rebel, the idiots of the Zhan family will force him to. Huang Yi smiled. The eldest princess's plans are flawless. No one can match up to you. Don't flatter me. The eldest princess covered her mouth and smiled shyly. I am far inferior to my brother the emperor. She suddenly sighed. Her gaze pierced through the layers of white gauze, and no one knew where it landed. Her incomparably beautiful face looked a little dazed. Her eyebrows were like a painting, and her expression was like that of a fairy. To the side, Huang Yi couldn't help but stare. The matter of the paper last time had a great impact on the princess's reputation. After a long time, Huang Yi finally broke away from that beautiful image. In a low voice he said, "It's a pity that we haven't been able to find out. But according to the news from the Yi family of the capital's garrison, the matter of the assassins in Guangxin Palace should have something to do with the Overwatch Council." The eldest princess continued to stare blankly at the sky, as if she hadn't heard what he said. After a while she opened her soft lips and said, "Don't worry about these small matters. What we need to do now is to completely pull Shang Shanhu onto our boat." After a moment of silence, Huang Yi suddenly revealed a glimmer of anger. "In my eyes, this is not a small matter. The princess plans day and night for the court. Last year's Niolon Street incident, the ignorant people and evil officials only thought that the eldest princess wanted to kill Master Fan and take back the palace treasury. How could they know that the princess wanted to find an opportunity for the emperor to send troops north? The court gained a great deal of territory from this matter, but who would remember that this matter had anything to do with you? The eldest princess Li Yunrui's brows gradually showed annoyance. She waved her hand and said, "No need to say more." Huang Yi looked at the eldest princess's beautiful face and said with determination, "Let's talk about the matter of Yan Bingyun." Originally, the princess only planned it in secret. Unexpectedly, it was exposed by those lowly people. Now the people of Qing Kingdom all think that the princess is in cahoots with foreign countries. Do those stupid people not understand that, given the princess's status, even if she was in cahoots with foreign countries, what benefit would there be? People always only see the surface of things. They don't know how much benefit the princess's secret arrangements will bring to the court. The eldest princess looked at him coldly. After a moment, she suddenly said, "When Yuan Hongdao arrives, let me know." Huang Yi wanted to say something, but stopped. After a moment, the eldest princess giggled. In a soft voice she said, "The world laughs at me for being too crazy. I laugh at the world for not seeing through it. As long as the emperor is well, and the kingdom of Qing is well, I don't care about those things." Huang Yi's heart trembled. He vaguely felt something, but he trembled and didn't dare say anything. Chen Pingping should have his own plans. The eldest princess smiled. "I believe that cute child Fan Xian also has his own plans. Actually, everyone's goals for the outside world are similar. It's just that there are some differences internally. If Shaowen doesn't escape this time, then when he arrives in Shangjing, have our people contact the diplomatic mission and have Fan Xian cooperate with us." Huang Yi was shocked. How could he join hands with the enemy? As if guessing what he was thinking, the eldest princess was extremely weak. She said with hidden mockery, "There are some things that you shouldn't think about. Are you saying these things today to move me?" A trace of ridicule flashed through her beautiful eyes. "In this life, what I hate most is being moved by common people like you. I wouldn't dare." Huang Yi was sweating profusely. He raised his head to look at the eldest princess. "Then should we temporarily stop Yan Xiaoyi's plan regarding Sir Fan Jr.? Why should we stop it?" The eldest princess looked at him with a smile. That chill made Huang Yi lower his head. "I like Fan Xian very much. This son-in-law of mine has not disappointed me, so I don't want him to be too far away from me. Dead or alive, he should be a very beautiful little boy." The most indescribably beautiful woman in the kingdom of Qing slowly raised her face. Her beautiful features were incomparably resolute. Who said that women couldn't shine on the world stage? Since there had been one before, she could definitely become the second. Chapter 194. In the past, Fan Xian had never truly looked at Sea Lily with his heart. He didn't even care for her beautiful face, because Fan Xian himself had a very something face. Ever since they had left the capital, this long journey had, for some reason, gradually, this woman had left a faint mark in Fan Xian's mind. Perhaps it was because of her pitiful past, or perhaps it was because the methods of the Overwatch Council were too cruel, or perhaps it was because, as the former head of the 7th Bureau had said when he first entered the council's prison, Fan Xian's methods may be cruel, but his heart was still soft. At least, it was easy for him to soften. He reminded himself more and more not to have tender feelings for the fairer sex, but all the more he felt that Sea Lily was pitiful. This kind of pitifulness was not faked, but a natural feeling brought about by the fate of her life. It was completely different from that of the eldest princess, who was as beautiful as a mortal. Over the past few days, Fan Xian had taken out the medicine he carried with him and found a few suitable plants in the fields by the lake. Somewhat woodenly, he concocted the antidote. This was his promise to Sea Lily. Since Sea Lily had told him about Chen Pingping's idea, although he didn't know if it was true, he would cure Sea Lily. As for the white and red sleeves, they were not within Fan Xian's scope of consideration. What he considered was simpler and more direct. After a few days of treatment, Sea Lily did not appear to have changed, but she went to the toilet more often. Fan Xian waited quietly to one side, which made the girl feel a little embarrassed. The diplomatic mission's carriages gradually turned east, circling the lake. In another 2 days, they would arrive at Wudu, where the Northern Qi army would come to take over the defense. Actually, the Northern Qi people call this lake the North Sea. Sea Lily stood by the lake, running her fingers over the coarse reeds. Fan Xian looked at her and asked, When did you go to Northern Qi? When I was very young. My parents took me and my brother and ran for our lives. The Overwatch Council hunted us down, and most of my grandfather's trusted aides were dead. No one dared to take us in. Sea Lily smiled bitterly. Actually, I don't have much of an impression of my grandfather, although I know he was the prince most likely to inherit the throne. Fan Xian calculated the time. At that time, it should have been a few years since the assassination of the Qing prince. He couldn't help but fall silent. Out of the corner of his eye, he watched Sea Lily's clothes flutter gently in the lake breeze. He smiled slightly, thinking that his mother had killed this girl's grandfather. He couldn't let her know about it. Sea Lily sighed and combed her hair, which had been messed up by the lake breeze. She frowned and said, "Because we were pursued by the Overwatch Council, my father died under the blades of the palace guards. My mother took my brother and I and luckily escaped. In such a big world, there was nowhere to go. After much thought, we fled to a foreign country and finally settled down in Northern Qi." Fan Xian furrowed his brows slightly. His family had been destroyed, his father had died a tragic death, and he had left home. It was indeed a difficult life. Sea Lily looked at the mist rising from the surface of the lake and sighed. Unfortunately, peaceful days cannot last. Somehow, the royal family of Northern Qi found out who we were, and so they brought us to Shangjing. Fan Xian furrowed his brows again and said, "They definitely don't have good intentions." Sea Lily turned her head and looked at him with a smile. "Do you have good intentions? Or do you think the Emperor of Qing and the court of Qing have good intentions towards our family?" Fan Xian was speechless for a moment. He laughed self-mockingly. "After all, it is an enemy country. Before my father died, he said the same thing." Sea Lily seemed to have thought of something. She slowly closed her eyes, her long eyelashes gently trembling. "Later, my mother also died of illness, leaving me and my brother alone. Since the royal family of Northern Qi wanted to use our past, they naturally wanted to control us. So we grew up in the royal palace of Northern Qi." "It was at that time that you met the Emperor of Northern Qi." Fan Xian walked to her side and tightened the cloak around her. "Come to think of it, you and the young emperor were childhood sweethearts." Sea Lily smiled. His surname was Zhan. At the time, he didn't look like an emperor at all. He was about the same age as me, but he was like my brother, fooling around in the palace every day. "Then why did you later willingly become a spy for Northern Qi and hide in the capital of Qing?" This was something Fan Xian was very interested in. "The Emperor of Northern Qi wanted to marry me." Sea Lily turned around and looked at Fan Xian with a smile that wasn't quite a smile. "And I have a family feud with the current royal family of Qing. So I wanted to return home. This reason is very sufficient." Fan Xian shook his head. "This reason is not sufficient." Sea Lily smiled. "The main thing is that the Empress Dowager did not allow me to marry the Emperor, so she allowed me to return home. She had the spies of Northern Qi cooperate with me to build a stronghold on the Lujing River in the capital." Fan Xian thought of something, and stopped himself from speaking. Sea Lily guessed what he was thinking. Her eyes flickered, revealing a hint of charm. She explained softly, "Sea Ling and my companions are all aces of Northern Qi, and some are experts at using knockout drugs. Naturally, those who enter the curtains cannot touch my body. There are others who can take their place." Fan Xian raised his eyebrows, and a look of indifference appeared on his handsome face. He smiled. "Why bother explaining this to me? Don't you want to hear it?" Sea Lily was a woman, after all, and had a crystal-clear heart. She had long since seen through Fan Xian's little thoughts, so she did not get angry. On the contrary, she asked him gently. Fan Xian smiled and quietly said, "At least that night, you did not knock me out. If I'd known earlier that you were Fei Jie's student, I would have stayed far, far away from you. That way, I wouldn't have to be drugged by your drugs." Sea Lily glared at him, her eyes flirtatious and rippling. Fan Xian felt a little uncomfortable being stared at. He chuckled and looked back into the girl's eyes. "Then when you woke up that day and realized you had been knocked out, would you have been afraid? Would you have thought about how carelessly you had lost your womanhood, and felt that it was not worth it?" The wind by the lake did not have much of the warmth of early spring. On the contrary, it was somewhat chilly, and it blew the reeds, which had not the slightest hint of green. The wind blew on Sea Lily's face, and she felt that the heat on her face had subsided. She did not know that there were still 2 patches of red on her face, revealing her shyness. After a while, Sea Lily gently bit her lower lip. After I woke up that day, of course, I felt a hidden bitterness, but I thought. She bravely raised her head and looked at Fan Xian's extremely handsome face. She smiled. I thought that it was my first night with a pretty boy like you, and it was worth it. Fan Xian had not expected Sea Lily to speak so boldly and so bitterly. For a moment, he did not know how to respond. After a while he mumbled, This. What? Sea Lily seemed to smile, and her eyes softened as she looked at Fan Xian. I have always felt that since you are a descendant of the royal family of the kingdom of Qing, it is indeed somewhat dangerous for you to hang around on the pleasure boats every day. What if the other party was not me, but a pervert who used knockout drugs? Fan Xian coughed. For some reason, he was now somewhat concerned about Sea Lily's difficult and dangerous situation. Sea Lily's expression was somewhat sluggish. I have never thought of myself as a descendant of the royal family, she said quietly. I am just a pitiful woman who bears a blood feud, but has no idea how to exact revenge. Please do not misunderstand, Master Fan. That night, the diplomatic mission's entourage set up camp on high ground by the lake. The carriages were arranged in a semicircle around the perimeter, and the lights of the tents in the middle had long since been extinguished. Sea Lily's residence was next to Fan Xian's. Perhaps the conversation during the day had worn too much out of the minds of this strange young couple, but they did not climb over the wall. There were no rags, and no erotic stories in the dark of the night. Everything was very quiet. In the distance, the Black Knights could be faintly seen on the slope, and around the camp, there were tiger guards and secret agents of the Overwatch Council patrolling. The white moonlight shone on every corner of the earth. There were no clouds, no wind, and no stars that night. The silvery moonlight was like the gently brushing hands of a fairy, caressing the people in the camp, urging them to quickly sleep in order to prepare for the arduous journey tomorrow. Fan Xian would not allow Xiao En to get out of the carriage, so he still sat in the well-sealed carriage. The moonlight shone on the black carriage, reflecting a strange light. Deep in the night, the entire camp seemed to have fallen into a dark and sweet dream. A black shadow floated to the side of Xiao En's carriage like a gust of wind. He took out a key, dipped it in an oiled cloth, and then inserted it into the keyhole of the carriage door. The key entered the hole without making a sound. It was a sign of the care taken. The carriage door was pushed open, and Xiao En slowly raised his head to stare at the night walker at the door. The iron shackles that should have bound his hands and feet had long since been undone, and were placed smoothly on the floor of the carriage. Xiao En stepped out of the carriage. His long white hair fell over his shoulders, competing with the moonlight in the sky for its silver splendor. He looked around coldly and frowned slightly. He knew that something was very wrong. But there was no time to think about it. The old man glanced at Fan Xian's camp, and like a black shadow, he disappeared into the night by the lake. Fan Xian should have been asleep long ago, but now his eyes were open. He sat on a chair in the tent, and his fingers gently played with a teacup. The teacup contained an extremely light amount of knockout drug. The seeds of hibiscus tea were mixed with the tea's flavor, making it extremely difficult to taste. Sensing the slight change in the atmosphere outside, he began to count. 1, 2, 3, 4. Chapter 195. When he counted to 30, Fan Xian lifted the curtain and walked out of his residence. He looked coldly at the black carriage. There seemed to be nothing out of the ordinary about it. Even the secret mark Wang Qinian had placed in front of the carriage door had not been moved. His opponent was indeed an expert. At that moment, there was a sudden shuddering sound throughout the camp. Other than the members of the diplomatic mission who had been drugged, the trusted aides of the Qinian unit, who had been notified by Fan Xian, all stood behind him. Behind him came the sound of heavy breathing and the sound of something digging the ground. It was the sound of 3 black dogs. Their mouths were covered with leather, so they couldn't make any noise. Fan Xian scratched his itchy hair and waved his hand. Open the door and release the dogs. Wang Qinian calmly waved his hand, and his subordinates loosened the ropes. The 3 black dogs, who had been locked up for a month, could no longer control their violent, bestial instincts. Following the faint scent that entered their nostrils, they silently went berserk. Their 4 toes dug into the ground, and they became 3 black shadows that fiercely pounced out of the camp. At that moment, there was a flash of cold light. Countless poisoned weapons flew toward the bodies of the dogs. With a series of clanging sounds, the rain-like hidden weapons met with a gust of wind, and fell to the ground far away. Immediately after, the gust of wind rushed toward the assassins who had launched a sneak attack. There were several tearing sounds, and after a few miserable cries, the bodies of 2 assassins were cut into 3 pieces. Their heads flew into the air, and blood sprayed everywhere. A long knife rose from the ground, piercing through the air and cutting into the armpit of the last assassin. With 2 swishing sounds, the assassin's arms were like white lotus roots dipped in syrup. They were separated from his body and fell to the ground, bouncing a few times. The leader of the Tiger Guards, Gao De, sheathed his long knife and held it behind his back. The 6 Tiger Guards behind him sheathed their knives as well. They stood neatly in the middle of the camp in the darkness, looking very handsome. But now was not the time for posturing. Wang Qinian had already leaped to the side of the assassin whose arms had been cut off. His leap seemed ordinary, but in the blink of an eye, he had covered a distance of several dozen feet. The Overwatch Council's reputation as a pair of wings was not in vain. With quick movements, Wang Qinian fiercely stabbed the iron rod in his hand into the assassin's mouth. After a series of stirring, an extremely unpleasant sound rang out. Wang Qinian reached into the assassin's already bloody mouth and pulled out the poisonous tooth. He carefully wrapped it in a cloth, then took out a round wooden ball from his bosom and stuffed it into the assassin's mouth to prevent the assassin from biting off his tongue and committing suicide. The assassin's arms had been chopped off, and blood flowed like a river. He was in so much pain that he wished he was dead. After being stuffed by Wang Qinian, tears, snot, and saliva flowed into his mouth. He looked incomparably miserable and terrifying. The enemy actually managed to sneak into the courtyard. Wang Qinian frowned as he looked at the assassin's face and realized that it was a familiar face. Fortunately, the method of hiding poison is the same as in the yard. He then turned to his subordinate and said, "Heal him. Do not let him die. Treat him well and make sure he confesses." The subordinate responded in a low voice, but he asked curiously, "Master Wang, you've already broken all his teeth. Will the poison enter his body?" Wang Qinian was startled. He had been a civil official for so many years that he was indeed a bit rusty. He hurriedly took the wooden ball out of the assassin's mouth and washed it with clean water. He then fed the assassin a few antidote pills that Commissioner Fan had given him. Seeing that he was about to put the wooden ball back into the assassin's mouth, the subordinate finally couldn't help but say, "His teeth are all broken. How can he commit suicide by biting off his tongue?" Wang Qinian was greatly embarrassed. He turned his head and scolded, "I like to stuff wooden balls in his mouth. Can't I?" While the camp was bustling with noise and excitement, Fan Xian had already tied up his sleeves and trousers. He flipped the back of his hat over to hide his face, and under the cover of his black clothes, he disappeared into the night. The 7 Tiger Guards, with their amazing bladesmanship, followed him in the direction of the 3 tracking dogs. There was no sound along the way, and they didn't startle the moon in the sky. They only caused the reeds to sway gently. The camp was guarded by the people of the Overwatch Council, and the Black Knights had left a squad outside. Fan Xian was at ease. Although the poison he had injected into Xiaowen's body was tyrannical, the most important thing was that even though Xiaowen had used his powerful Xueqi to expel it from his body, it still left a faint smell in his pores. Xiaowen couldn't smell it himself, but the dogs could. In some ways, humans were indeed inferior to dogs. A dark cloud appeared on the horizon, and the moonlight immediately dimmed. Only the sound of the night wind brushing against the surface of the lake and the swaying of the reeds could be heard. Fan Xian's entire body was wrapped in darkness. Only a pair of bright eyes could be seen. After discovering that Xiaowen had succeeded in expelling the poison, Fan Xian had taken the initiative to plan this operation. After all, no one in the diplomatic mission dared to oppose his idea, and the members of the Overwatch Council, who knew the inside story, followed his lead. But this was also a very risky operation. If Xiaowen really did take the opportunity to escape, Yan Bingyun naturally wouldn't be able to return. A poisonous snake would forever remain in the darkness, waiting to deal a fatal blow to a specific person in the kingdom of Qing. No matter what, Fan Xian couldn't bear such a great loss. Suddenly, a A few strange noises came from the reeds in front of him. Fan Xian twitched his nose. Through the special cloth, he could still smell the faint scent of blood. The 3 ferocious black dogs seemed to be dead. The fact that Xiao En was able to kill the 3 ferocious dogs in the blink of an eye meant that he had recovered a lot of his bodily functions. Fan Xian quietly stood on the slightly damp muddy ground, separated by the heavy curtain of reeds. He narrowed his eyes and looked ahead, calculating the distance between him and Xiao En. He clenched his right hand and raised it. The 7 tiger guards behind him immediately understood their young master's intentions. They looked at each other, then scattered into the reeds, not daring to get too close to Xiao En. At this moment, Xiao En was definitely aware that someone was chasing after him. But this old man clearly hadn't forgotten all of his escape techniques even after 20 years in prison. Relying on the cover of the night, the cover of the reeds, and the blowing of the lake breeze, he silently fled towards the northeastern border. Fan Xian knew that there must be someone there to receive Xiao En. He calmly flew forward, the tyrannical Xueqi in his body gradually circulating. His feet touched the slightly damp muddy ground, and his whole body shot forward like an arrow, scattering the reeds that came his way. Occasionally, he would stop and carefully examine his surroundings. His fingers lightly slid across the reeds, which were clearly freshly broken, and his eyes fell on the steady footprints he had left in the mud. Xiao En was circling. Fan Xian was circling. In the darkness of the night, the hunter and the prey were one in front and one behind, but no one knew when the roles would be reversed. For Xiao En, he had to break away from the diplomatic missions control and meet up with the people on his side. For Fan Xian, he had to seize this opportunity that he had single-handedly created. Gradually, Fan Xian's eyes, which were not covered by the black cloth, grew brighter and brighter. The marks that Xiao En had left behind were becoming more and more obvious. It seemed that he was old and weak, and no longer as brave as he had been in the past. Furthermore, the poison he had injected these days had not been for nothing. Passing through the reeds by the lakeside, he came to the edge of a short fir forest. Fan Xian frowned. His extremely sharp eyes, even in the darkness, could still see that the footsteps on the edge of the forest were somewhat disorderly. He didn't dare to be careless. He slowly retreated, making a large circle, and entered the short fir forest from the side. Suddenly, a mournful whistle rang out in the darkness. A black rope sprang up from the shallow grass at the foot of the forest. It wrapped around the ankle of a man. It was a tiger guard who had followed Fan Xian into the forest. The tiger guard's entire body was still in the air, but his body had already bounced up with great strength. With a twist of his right hand, the long knife on his back swung out with a clang, cutting the black rope in half. The tiger guard's entire body fell forward with the force of the black rope. It looked like he was about to land on solid ground. A crossbow bolt flew at him. Startled, he raised his long knife and knocked the bolt away with a clang. His entire body struggled backwards, retreating half a step from where he had expected to land. The tip of his foot relaxed, and only then did he discover that there was a pit in front of him. In the pit, there were a few sharp branches that formed a simple trap. Fan Xian stood close to the tree and released his finger from the trigger. Watching the tiger guard once again disappear into the darkness, he let out a sigh of relief. From within the forest came the cry of 2 owls. It was very unpleasant and ear-piercing. There was a slight movement on one of the branches, and the knife flashes in all directions suddenly broke free from the silence. They transformed into 7 streaks of snow-like beauty, cutting through all the space in that area. Countless chunks of blood splattered in the center of the forest. With a swish, the leader of the tiger guards, Gao De, carried his knife behind his back. He waved a torch and illuminated the dead man's face. He shook his head. Clearly, the dead man was not Xiao En. The torch was extinguished again, and the 7 tiger guards appeared. In a semicircle formation, they searched the depths of the short forest. Fan Xian disappeared into the darkness, moving slowly along the trees. He hadn't expected Xiao En to take the man who had opened the car door with him. This realization made him feel a little strange. But he knew that Xiao En was still in the forest, because the poison he had ingested these past few days was still emitting a faint smell. The moon slowly floated out from the clouds, and the forest was bathed in silver light. Fan Xian pressed his palm lightly against a tree, feeling the slight tremors coming from all directions. His heart was filled with the confidence to kill his opponent. Xiao En was in this forest. Chapter 196. Xueqi could not hide far. 20 years in prison had taken a toll on him that was difficult to repair. And these days, he had to fight Fan Xian's powerful poison. With great difficulty, he had reopened his meridians, but he found that after a tense escape, he had turned back to kill the 3 hounds that refused to let him go. He had wasted some of his strength. He clung tightly to the branch, his chest heaving up and down. His breathing was a little rushed, and he couldn't help but laugh at himself. When people get old, they become useless. The moonlight shone into the forest, and he could clearly see the 7 powerful figures with long swords on their backs. They were using a very cautious method to force their way toward his hiding place. Xueqi was actually a little shocked. Since leaving prison, this was the first time he had seen the tiger guards of the diplomatic mission. He didn't know when the kingdom of Qing had acquired such a powerful force outside of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. But he was more worried about the young man called Fan Xian. Xueqi knew long ago that his opponent was determined to kill him, and so he had deliberately revealed an opening. Over the mountain next to the forest was Wudu. Xueqi's most secretive disciple had sent out a reinforcement team, waiting for him on the other side of the national border. A cold light flashed in Xueqi's eyes, and he decided to take a gamble. It had been 4 hours since he had escaped from the diplomatic missions camp, and the pursuit and counter-pursuit had also been silent and austere for 4 hours. In the distance, the eastern horizon was already faintly white, and the milky white fog that was unique to the side of the Great Lake had begun to rise from the short fir forest. The fog gradually filled the forest, and this was Xueqi's chance. He slid down the branch without a sound, and his whole body lay flat on the muddy ground. Like a mudfish, he bravely moved in the opposite direction in which the 7 tiger guards were searching. As he crawled along the muddy ground, Xueqi gradually found that familiar feeling. It was the same feeling he had many years ago, when he was a little secret agent of Northern Wei, when he had risked his life. The old man suppressed his heavy breathing to the extreme, and the pure Xueqi in his body supported his somewhat weak energy. Under the cover of the fog, he was about to brush past the 7 powerful tiger guards. Although he was a little disheveled, and had somewhat lost the grace of a genius of a generation, as long as he could break through this forest and return to the north, everything seemed to be a piece of cake. Thud, thud, thud. 3 snake-like crossbow bolts shot toward Sean's body like lightning, as if they had eyes of their own. Sean's body seemed to have some sort of sensing ability. Before the crossbow bolt reached his body, he had already shifted a few inches to the left to avoid the misfortune of being impaled. But in this way, his whereabouts had already been exposed. The 7 snow-like and bloodthirsty long sabers turned into a terrifying net that directly covered the sky above him. With a muffled groan, Sean had already disappeared from where he stood. The true battle prowess of a powerhouse of a generation had finally erupted at this moment. The air in the forest crackled, and in the blink of an eye, the old man had already floated to the side of the 7 long swords. His body leaned forward, and his momentum actually dispersed the thick fog at the end of the night. He slapped his palms on the long swords. The 2 tiger guards let out muffled groans as they were sent flying by Xueqi's palms. Their bodies smashed into the trees, snapping 2 small trees in the middle. Gauda let out a wild roar and gripped the hilt of the long swords with both hands. He slashed down at the ghost-like figure with a head full of white hair. This saber whistled through the air, but Sean's face was expressionless. The pair of eyes hidden in his white hair shone with a faint light. His palms came together, and his body disappeared into the fog, dodging Gauda's unstoppable saber. He struck out with his palms, and the strong wind caused Gauda to dodge for an instant. In an instant, the remaining 4 tiger guards' long swords arrived like snow, enveloping Sean's entire body. Sean let out a shrill howl. His feet pushed off the ground, and rotten mud flew everywhere. His 10 fingers shot out, and countless needle-shaped wooden sticks shot out in all directions. The 4 tiger guards heard the whooshing sound of the wind. They gripped their long swords with both hands to protect their entire bodies. The hilts of their swords were in front of their faces, afraid that these unknown hidden weapons would stab into their eyes. Even so, they still felt a sudden prickling pain on their bodies, and their hands were covered in thin wooden threads. Gauda struck again, and the strong wind from the blade blew away the wooden spikes. He gripped his long sword with both hands and raised his head. He saw that Sean's body had already become a faint shadow, piercing through the thick fog and reaching the top of the trees. With a crash, the newly grown leaves were scattered in all directions by a powerful force. Fan Xian's body, shrouded in black clothing, was like a stone from the heavens. He soared through the air and smashed into Xiao En, who had risen to the highest point. His Xueqi was almost exhausted, and he was reaching out to grab a tree branch. He had been hiding to one side. The 3 crossbow bolts from before had been fired by him. With great difficulty, he had found such a good opportunity. How could he let it go? In the time it takes for a spark to fly off a flint, he and Xiao En had already collided. He reversed his elbow and raised his wrist, and the slender dagger, glowing with black light, fiercely stabbed towards the old man's throat. But at this moment, Fan Xian suddenly realized that Xiao En's eyes, hidden in his messy white hair, were unexpectedly calm. Xiao En's entire attention was focused on Fan Xian. He had been waiting for this moment. Another sharp cry rang out from the withered lips of this old man who desperately longed for freedom. His 2 hands quickly intersected and cleverly caught Fan Xian's knife-wielding wrist. His other hand was like a venomous snake spitting out its tongue, stabbing toward Fan Xian's exposed eyes outside the black cloth. The 2 of them did not stop, and fiercely slammed into the tree. It seemed that Xiao En had even calculated this force. He purposely stopped his elbow, and used the recoil to increase the speed at which he was digging towards Fan Xian's eyes. The old man's fingers were thin and withered, and looked terrifying. Fan Xian's eyes lit up. In the thick fog, 2 hands of different skin colors twisted together like a towel. A strange feeling flashed through Xiao En's eyes, as if he did not know how the black-clothed Fan Xian had reached out with his hand. This was a prediction of the enemy's attack. This was the good result of Wu Zhu's teachings. No matter how terrifying Xiao En was, he was not as terrifying as Wu Zhu. Fan Xian grunted. His right hand tightly wrapped around Xiao En's wrist, and a violent wave of Xueqi entered his opponent's body. His empty hand swept out, and a beam of light cut through the white fog. It was the edge of a knife. Xiao En straightened his palm, shaking Fan Xian's wrist. He raised his knee towards Fan Xian's lower abdomen, and pressed down with his right thumb. A faint black light shone from his fingernails, and it narrowly missed Fan Xian's neck. When Xiao En's thumb moved, Fan Xian twisted his body, relying on the endless Xueqi in his body to force his way out of the way. His body leaned to the side, and he felt a chill on his left shoulder. He knew that the blade hidden in his opponent's fingernails had cut into his flesh. The dagger in his left hand was blocked by Xiao En, and his right hand was competing with Xiao En's internal strength. At first glance, it seemed that he could not exert any strength, but the pain in his shoulder made Fan Xian grunt. A sharp edge extended from the dagger, and suddenly one of Xiao En's fingers was cut off. No matter how strong Xiao En was, he was still old. The pain of a broken finger made his right hand loosen slightly. Fan Xian silently pressed down, and the slender dagger shining with a black light ruthlessly pierced into Xiao En's left shoulder. The 2 of them were still in the process of falling. Xiao En was silent, as if the dagger had not pierced his body. But he still opened his mouth, as if in pain. A thin needle shot out from the old man's mouth, heading straight for Fan Xian's face. Fan Xian's left foot ruthlessly stepped on Xiao En's knee, and after the sound of bones breaking, he forced himself up half a foot, allowing the needle to sink into his chest. He felt a dull pain in his chest, and with a twist of his left wrist, a long black dagger with 2 sharp edges sliced toward Xiao En's wrist like a windmill. With a slap, Xiao En withdrew his hand. His pure Xueqi gave him enough power to shake off Fan Xian's right hand. Fan Xian's right hand tilted backwards, seemingly powerless, and brushed past his hair. Then, like a bolt of lightning, it bounced back. The thin needle between his fingers gently pierced into Xiao En's neck. Xiao En's body stiffened, and Fan Xian's chest also felt dull. The 2 of them finally hit the ground, sending up a cloud of fallen leaves and rotten mud, and the stench was unbearable. A long knife slashed horizontally, making the sound of cutting flesh. The thick fog rose again. Gao Da, holding the knife with both hands, looked at Fan Xian, whose clothes were mottled with blood, but found that there was no trace of Xiao En. Fan Xian and Xiao En's silent battle seemed to last a long time, but in reality, it was only the process of falling from the top of the tree to the bottom of the tree. In that short moment, 2 strong men, old and young, in the dark of night, silently carried out the world's most dangerous contest. The seemingly ordinary movements of the 2 of them, in reality, condensed the most elite killing techniques of the Northern Wei Kingdom, Fan Xian's experience in killing since he was a child. Although it was not extravagant, it was full of effectiveness. If it were any other strong man fighting against either Xueqi or Fan Xian in this thick fog of night, perhaps they would feel a chill. This was a fight between two 9th-level assassins. In this world, this kind of scene was extremely rare. Xueqi is finished. Fan Xian coughed twice, and with his extremely thin gloved hand, he pulled out the thin needle that had almost taken his life from the Overwatch Council's special clothes. Once again, he confirmed that the poison in the small wound on his shoulder was not very strong, and then silently reloaded his crossbow. Chapter 197. Xueqi knew he was done for. After landing, he relied on his decades of experience and the decaying leaves to disguise himself. He barely managed to hide his scent, and quietly made his way out of the forest. If Fan Xian and the 7 masters were able to follow him all the way through the reeds by the lakeside and into the forest, then there must be something on him that they could control. Xueqi covered his mouth with his hand, forcibly suppressing the urge to cough. 20 years in prison had damaged his heart and arteries. As he fell from the tree, he could clearly and sadly feel that his brain reacted slower than his body. If it were 20 years ago, he believed he could have easily killed Fan Xian while he was falling. Even if there were 7 sword-wielding masters under the tree, as long as he had the familiar North Sea fog to accompany him, Xueqi was still confident that he could easily escape. It was just that. Everyone would grow old one day. The wound on his shoulder could not be stopped. The strange dagger in Fan Xian's hand had a strange edge, and blood continued to flow. Xueqi felt his body grow weak, but his eyes flashed with a hint of a smile, as if he had seen through something. He tore off a piece of his clothing, and with a twist of his hand, pressed down the wound. His kneecap had also been broken into several large pieces. The sharp pain stimulated his mind, allowing this old spy chief to continue making his way through the thick fog. After falling from the tree, Gao De, the leader of the Tiger Guards, had sliced open his abdomen. Although he had dodged quickly, he could not stop the wound from gradually expanding, and his black clothes gradually became bloody. Although Xueqi had suffered many and serious injuries, the one that truly made him feel helpless was the thin needle in his neck. He did not dare to pull it out, not knowing what the consequences would be. He only felt the blood vessels in his body gradually congeal, and his speed of advance also slowed. His pale old hand still resolutely pulled out the mushroom from under the tree, chewed it a few times, and swallowed it. This type of sequoia mushroom could replenish the blood and disinfect it. This short fir forest was a place he had been very familiar with decades ago, so he had chosen to escape from here. Unexpectedly, he still could not escape from that young man's methods. The sky gradually brightened, but the thick fog still did not dissipate. The white morning light diffused in the fog, exuding a holy aura. Blood finally dripped from the old man's body. Although the sound of the blood dripping onto the ground was faint, he knew that those young men were following him like ferocious tigers in hiding. They could charge out at any time, but he didn't know why they hadn't made a move yet. But Xueqi knew that he was finished. No one knew what kind of power supported this old man, who had suffered 20 years of torture and had suffered a few heavy injuries today, to push his body through the fog-shrouded short fir forest, climb over the mountain, and step on the vast, slightly wet meadow. Finally, he saw the land that belonged to northern Qi. The town called Wudu shone brightly in the distant sunlight. Xueqi sighed and sat down dejectedly. He used his hand to move his right leg, which had already been shattered at the knee, to the left. He coughed twice. In that town, the only thing that reflected light was the glazed tiles. Although this was the countryside and they could not afford to use glass, Xueqi had known for many years that there used to be a glazed factory a dozen miles behind the town. After it had fallen into ruin, the townspeople had picked up some fragments and placed them on the roofs of their houses. No matter when or where, people always needed to arrange some light for themselves in a gloomy world. Xueqi was the same. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the glowing shards, thinking that after 20 years, the town did not seem to have changed much. On the plains outside the town, a battle had long since ended. The troops that had come to Xueqi's aid had been completely slaughtered. About 200 black knights stood like a lifeless black wall on one side of the plains. A few more black knights made their way through the pools of blood on the battlefield. When they saw an enemy that was still alive, they struck them with their swords. Muffled sounds rang out incessantly on the battlefield. Those young men lying in pools of blood on the meadow should be Hu'er's subordinates, right? Xueqi squinted at the scene and suddenly felt tired. He coughed again. He had long since understood Fan Xian's plan. Although that handsome young man still lacked much experience, he had the courage to act. Fan Xian had chased him all the way to Wudu, and naturally he wanted to frame the northern Qi soldiers who had died horrible deaths in the meadow. A slender dagger was silently handed to him. The chill on the blade made goosebumps rise on the back of the old man's neck. "You're not as strong as I thought." Fan Xian's calm voice came from behind him. Xueqi pursed his dry lips and laughed bitterly. "I'm not as strong as I thought either. Given your experience, it shouldn't have been difficult to determine that this was a trap. Why did you still jump in?" This was the thing that Fan Xian had been most confused about during his night of pursuit. Xueqi did not answer him. He only remained silent. He did not tell the young man that because of Wang Qinyan's unintentional words, he had thought of a little girl and a temple. "Why haven't you made your move?" Xueqi's voice was abnormally cold. He looked at the unusually quiet town in front of him. "You and I are both in this line of work. You should know that the longer something drags on, the easier it is for it to change. I just suddenly felt that I seemed to have made a mistake." Fan Xian tightened his grip on the dagger. His eyes, which were not covered by the black cloth, showed a trace of confusion. "I thought that the eldest princess would send someone to receive you. I didn't expect that it would only be Northern Qi. I don't know any eldest princess." Xueqi seemed to have long since cast aside the matter of life and death. He only took a deep breath of the fresh air of the meadow. It had been many years since he had smelled something so natural. In the Overwatch Council's prison, all he could smell was rust and hay. After so many years, he had grown tired of it. Fan Xian suddenly felt that something was strange. His eyes stared daggers at the back of the old man's head. "Let me remind you again. Since you want to kill me, and have chosen to do so on the border, it would be best if you acted immediately. That way, you can pin the blame on the troops below," Xueqi said coldly. "Otherwise, when the fake Northern Qi receptionists arrive, and you want to kill me again, you will have to consider the life and death of your comrade." Fan Xian narrowed his eyes. This plan to kill Xueqi on the border was a risk. More accurately, it was a risk with Yan Bingyun's life. Since Northern Qi's General Shang Shanhu had sent people to help Xueqi escape, then in the chaos of battle, Xueqi's death should be a reason that the young emperor of Northern Qi could accept and had to accept. The key was that the diplomatic mission was backed by the powerful military power of the Qing kingdom. But to Fan Xian's great disappointment, Yan Xiaoyi's army did not appear on the battlefield. If he could not kill the eldest princess, then what was the point of killing Xueqi? Thinking of something, Fan Xian tightened his grip on the dagger. His knuckles were pale. "Why do you all always think I'm still a tiger?" Xueqi did not turn his head, nor did he look down at the tip of the dagger. He smiled and said to himself, "I'm just a skinny tiger without teeth. It's just that I know a few things that others don't, and that's why I've been able to survive until now. In the kingdom of Qing, I'm a prisoner. Now that I've returned to the north, I'll still be a prisoner in the fake Northern Qi. Naturally, I have to fight. At my age, I don't really fear death. But I do fear not having freedom. Perhaps I understand now why Director Chen was willing to send you back, and then wanted me to kill you." Fan Xian didn't seem to care about Xueqi's warning. He continued to speak in a casual manner. "This is a trial. Mr. Xiao once said that I am very talented and very strong. It's just that I've never challenged a truly strong individual. You are the first truly strong individual I've ever challenged." Xueqi shook his head. He still maintained his sitting posture. "No, I've long since ceased to be a strong individual. I've only been bluffing along the way. As for Chen Pingping..." The old man suddenly laughed with extreme resentment and delight. "He actually doesn't know anything. He only knows that he can't kill me, so he can only lock me up. He doesn't know why he can't kill me, and he certainly doesn't know what he should learn from me. He thinks he can scheme against the world, but in reality, he's just a pitiful little fool." The old man was very agitated as he spoke. He coughed, and his wounds had long since reopened. Blood sprayed everywhere, falling onto the fresh grass. Somewhere in the grass, it trembled slightly in the wind. "What secret do you have?" Fan Xian's face was expressionless, but he quietly changed his direction. "What do you know?" I've been locked up for 20 years, and I haven't said anything. Even Chen Pingping lost his patience, and brought me out to be your prey in the trial of adulthood. Xiaowen laughed mockingly. Do you think I'd tell a yellow-haired kid like you? You're not even afraid of death. Why don't you dare tell me your secret? There are many things in this world that are scarier than death. Fan Xian sighed. He sensed that the 7 long knives behind him had already stealthily approached. He smiled slightly and tilted his head to the right to look at the neatly lined-up black knights in the distance. Suddenly, without warning, he stepped on the meadow with the tip of his foot, and his body slid to the left. A poisonous needle left his hand, and with a swish, it pierced into the grass. His body was already in midair, as if he were dancing in the air. The slender dagger in his hand was like a pitch-black poisonous snake, piercing straight ahead. It made a buzzing sound as it broke through the air. He had already condensed all the tyrannical Xueqi in his body. Earlier, the 7 tiger guards had already secretly occupied an advantageous position. Fan Xian's sudden sneak attack, and the 7 long knives cooperated with each other to attack the pile of grass, sending up several puddles of white snow. The cold light was dazzling. This kind of power, this kind of sudden movement, not to mention the ambusher, even the unfathomable eunuch Hong of the Qing Kingdom's royal palace would probably be in a difficult position, and would have to pay the price of blood and flesh. Chapter 198. However, things always exceeded everyone's expectations. At the beginning of this strange and torrential attack, a hand, a soft and fair hand, stretched out from the grass. Like the hand of a cute little girl catching fireflies, the index finger and thumb gently came together, and the poisonous needle that Fan Xian had shot out closed between his fingers. Then, the figure flew out from the underbrush, as if somewhat afraid of Fan Xian's unstoppable stab. She floated backwards, but with ease. Like a gust of wind, she avoided the tearing air that came from the sharp point of the black dagger. 7 long knives arrived, like a whirlwind of snow, everywhere they went. The silhouette flew up gracefully and danced among the 7 long sabers that were like snowflakes. Finally, the tip of his foot stepped on the saber with the greatest momentum, and his figure suddenly retreated 40 feet, quietly standing on the grassland. Gauda grunted and pulled back his knife. Along with the other 6 tiger guards, he stood in front of Fan Xian and Xiaowen, afraid that the ace would suddenly attack. It was a woman with a floral scarf on her head, and a basket in her elbow. In the basket, there were some fresh mushrooms. To be more accurate, she was a village girl. However, everyone knew that to be able to break through Fan Xian's poison needles, avoid the stab he had gathered all the power in his body, and to be able to float away while surrounded by 7 snow-like long knives, she was definitely not as simple as a village girl. Out of the corner of his eye, Fan Xian noticed that the eyes of the northern spy leader, Xiaowen, who did not even blink in the face of death, actually trembled when he saw the village girl. Fan Xian was slightly startled. Who was this female ace hiding in the underbrush? He walked forward, and the 7 tiger guards opened up a space in the middle. Gauda lowered his head and retreated, both hands tightly gripping the long knife. He stood guard behind Xiaowen, ready at any time to launch a thunderous strike and cut off Xiaowen's head. Miss, you are. Fan Xian looked at the woman and asked gently. His face glowed with a feeling like a spring breeze. The woman raised her head. Her appearance was not very special, and she could not be considered a beauty. However, her eyes were unusually bright, as though they reflected the colors of the meadow and the blue sky in her eyes. They were clear and bright, and incomparably fair. Fan Xian was a little absent-minded. He cupped his hands in salute. I am an official of the Overwatch Council of the Kingdom of Qing. I am here to escort criminals to the Kingdom of Qi. I do not know why you are here. Please do not be angry if I have offended you earlier. This village girl, this unfathomable village girl, was more powerful than Fan Xian. Fan Xian was a man who looked gentle on the outside but was shameless and gloomy on the inside. That was why he had a smile on his face and said things that even he did not believe. He knew what the other party was here for, and the other party also knew that he was aware of this fact, but he had to say it in a dignified and incomparably pure manner. The village girl smiled faintly. Her cheeks, which were originally not as beautiful as Yanli's, seemed incomparably lively because of this smile. The seemingly tacky floral scarf on her head began to emit a sense of familiarity. She lowered her head to look at the thin needle between her fingers. After a moment she said, This is the first time I have learned that Master Fan's weapon is actually a thin needle. Since she had already called him by his surname, Fan Xian could not bear to continue acting pretentiously. He could only rub his nose and smile bitterly. Am I that easy to recognize? Or is my fame so great that even the northern kingdoms know of me? Naturally, the immortal poet of a generation has been heard of all under heaven. This immortal poet has suddenly become the commissioner of the Overwatch Council of the Kingdom of Qing. Such an absurd yet world-shaking event, naturally no one would not know of it. The village girl raised the thin needle in her hand and looked at it carefully. Her eyes narrowed into crescent moons. She looked at the thin needle against the dark blue sky. It looked very much like the flying swords that the fairies of legend stood on. Ah, so it is an ordinary sewing needle. The village girl seemed to be very surprised by this discovery. There was an eye hole behind the poisonous needle. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. This was something his sister had prepared for him. Of course it was a sewing needle. He suddenly asked with concern, "Lady, are we going to keep chatting like this? Mr. Xiao has lost a lot of blood. I am afraid he does not want to hear it." Xiao Wen smiled. The village girl smiled. "Didn't you set up a trap to kill him?" Fan Xian smiled warmly. "Wrong. It was the rebel army of Northern Qi who wanted to break the peace treaty between the two countries. During the campaign, Mr. Xiao En was unfortunately killed by a stray arrow." The village girl giggled. She put her hands on her hips and pointed at Fan Xian's nose. She looked very much like the peasant women in the fields. "Master Fan, not only are you good at poetry, but you can also lie without batting an eyelid. No wonder you are the legendary Tian Mai. How could I dare? How could I dare?" Fan Xian's expression did not change. He continued to look at the village girl's face gently. "Lady, you are the legendary Tian Mai. I am just a very diligent and lucky person." The village girl's expression changed slightly. She looked at Fan Xian with even more interest. The scene fell into silence. Suddenly, an early bird chirped as it flew to the nearby meadow. It seemed to have smelled danger and the scent of blood, and immediately flew away. She smiled self-mockingly. "My name is Duo Duo." Begonia Duo Duo. Yes. Begonia was the most outstanding figure of the younger generation of Northern Qi. She was the disciple of the Grandmaster Ku He, and was rumored to be the most likely Tian Mai. In the Overwatch Council, Yan Ruohai had once warned Fan Xian. At the time, Fan Xian had been full of hope that she would not be a woman. He had not expected that she was indeed still a woman. Fan Xian's expression was calm, and he seemed to have no reaction. He continued to speak warmly. "Lady Begonia, are you here to take Mr. Xiao back home?" He knew who the other party was, but he concealed the shock in his heart very well. He smiled and looked back at Sean, who was still staring at the battlefield below the meadow. He said softly, "I didn't expect to meet you so soon." This woman named Begonia was clearly one of the most powerful figures in the world, but she had dressed herself like a village girl. She smiled. "Call me Duo Duo. It sounds better." At that moment, Xiao Wen suddenly hissed. "Neither of you is a Tian Mai. You are just two brats who like to bicker." Fan Xian felt ashamed. He knew that although this old man was no longer as valiant as he had been in the past, he still had a good eye for people. Him and this village girl were putting on a show here, and it was unnecessary. At that moment, Begonia bowed slightly to Xiao En, who was sitting dejectedly on the meadow. "On the orders of my teacher, I have come to escort Master Xiao back to the capital," she said respectfully. Fan Xian frowned, and his hands fell naturally to his sides. "We have not yet left the border, Begonia. Lady Duo Duo, it is too early to worry." He shook his head and waved his hand. The 6 tiger guards behind him immediately changed their formation, forming a charging stance. With themselves as the arrowhead, they aimed at Begonia. Behind them, Gouda had already gathered strength in his arms, preparing to use a lightning-fast strike to behead the dying Xiao En. A strange smile flashed through Begonia's eyes. Her fingers loosened, and the poisonous needle fell noiselessly into the grass. The coarse cloth she wore trembled slightly in the morning wind. "Master Fan, are you prepared to kill someone in front of me?" she said quietly. Fan Xian smiled. Who knew how many thoughts had spun through his mind? Looking into her eyes, he knew that she was not here to stop him from killing someone. She was probably here to watch him kill someone. He didn't know what kind of secret Xiaoan had, to be able to make Imperial Advisor coup. He changed his principle of not meddling in worldly affairs for many years, and send this woman, who clearly had the strength of a superior 9th-level martial artist, as an assassin. In this world, there are times when you need to make a very difficult decision in a very short period of time. Fan Xian had spent a lot of effort to lure Xiao En into a dead end, creating this perfect opportunity to kill him. But in this instant, he not only had to abandon his original plan, he had to do the exact opposite. Without question, this was a very preposterous and nonsensical choice. So most people would find it difficult to overcome this obstacle in their hearts. But Fan Xian was a person who was willing to give up. Since he had not succeeded in trapping Yan Xiaoyi in this plan, then killing Xiao En was no longer a very important matter. Furthermore, he was very interested in the secret in Xiao En's heart. So he smiled strangely, already pouncing towards Begonia, who wore a flowery headscarf on her head and carried a basket between her elbows. At the same time, he gave the order for the 7 tiger guards to cover Xiao En's retreat to the Black Knights. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. A total of 7 wind-breaking sounds rang out in a very orderly manner. Right above the meadow, even the light morning breeze seemed to have been cut into countless pieces by the slender black poison dagger. The pieces of Xueqi were like countless broken blades, flying around the begonia headscarf. Fan Xian was very satisfied with his 7 consecutive strikes. Although he had chased her through the night, his body was already somewhat tired. But when faced with the most outstanding figure of the younger generation in the world, especially the character he had naturally disliked in the novels he had read in his previous life, Fan Xian finally stimulated all the potential in his body and struck out with a dazzling number of strikes. Like 7 black lotuses, they bloomed one by one at the side of this woman called Hai Tang's hair. Then, they powerlessly and faintly faded away. Begonia's face was full of smiles. She held a simple dagger in her hand. There were still bits of grass by the side of the dagger, and the juicy bits of grass formed a few miraculous dots on the surface of the dagger. In that moment, each of Fan Xian's extremely sinister and extremely fast stabs had been softly countered by the dagger in the woman's hand. The tip of the dagger trembled slightly, appearing particularly weak and powerless in the wind. But it was like countless gusts of cool wind, binding Fan Xian's slender dagger. In the end, the tyrannical Xueqi that Fan Xian had imbued into the dagger became as light as a cloud in the wind. Chapter 199. A slight surprise appeared in Fan Xian's eyes. He sighed in admiration. No wonder you are Master Ku He's brilliant disciple. No wonder you are a superior 9th-level ace. You were able to so easily neutralize my attack. His expression was fake, but there was some truth in his words. Fan Xian knew that under the leadership of Uncle Wu Zhu, this force-feeding master, he was indeed not a match for this girl in front of him. He took a step back, his face full of determination. He sheathed the poisoned dagger into his boot and spread out his right hand. I am not a match for you in terms of weapons. I would like to ask for your martial arts. Hai Tang slowly sheathed her sword. The sword she carried with her was not very long, so the sheath was hidden in the village girl's clothes that did not match her identity at all. It was not easy to find. Fan Xian smiled slightly and raised his hands in greeting. The tip of his foot pushed off the ground. Without any reason, he transformed into a grey dragon and charged directly toward the girl's body. Hai Tang's clear eyes were wide open. Ever since she had left her apprenticeship, she had challenged countless aces from the north, but she had never encountered such a life-risking heroic style of fighting as Fan Xian. Did he not know that in this kind of stupid charge, all she had to do was turn around slightly, and she would be able to completely take control of the situation? Originally, her teacher, who was revered by everyone, had not given her any other tasks. He had also specifically warned her not to complicate the issue. When Hai Tang saw the beautiful young man looking down on her, her eyes still couldn't help but light up. She thought to herself that killing him right here and now was not a bad choice. Then, she turned slightly on her heel and shifted her center of gravity back 2 inches. In a flash, Fan Xian had already charged in front of her. A punch without any finesse struck straight out. His target was the bulging chest under the flowery clothing. When the fist was less than 3 inches from Hai Tang's body was like a willow branch. It was as if it had been snapped in half by the wind of the fist. Her entire body fell back in a miraculous manner. Using her heel as the axis, she drew a semicircle. A moment later, her entire body floated behind Fan Xian like a gust of wind. She gently raised her right palm and slapped toward the back of Fan Xian's head. It looked like a simple action, but given Fan Xian's speed and the short amount of time, it appeared incomparably exquisite. Her casual palm was like swatting a fly. It was swatted so casually, so matter-of-factly referred to the feeling it gave bystanders. Since that light palm had been swatted out, in the next moment, it would naturally fall on the back of Fan Xian's head, slapping this immortal of poetry into a poetry ghost in the underworld. Unfortunately, she had underestimated Fan Xian's reaction speed, his powerful control over his body, and the tyrannical Xueqi in his body. So Fan Xian grunted. His front foot had already sunk deep into the soft meadow soil. If a normal person wanted to suddenly stop while charging forward at such a high speed, their right knee would probably not be able to withstand the force and shatter into pieces. However, Fan Xian used the powerful rebound to abruptly stop his body. Without even turning his head, he pulled out the dagger from his boot and stabbed it from under his armpit. The tip of the black sword was pointing at the illusory palm that seemed to carry a trace of Transcendent's immortal qi. Haitong's brows furrowed. How could she have expected this young man to be so shameless? But she did not panic at all. She flicked her finger, and in a flash, it hit the side of the black dagger that was like a viper. Her palm lifted slightly, and her sleeve pierced through. Although she had avoided the danger of being pierced by the palm, she was still unable to deflect Fan Xian's tyrannical Xueqi attack. The basket that had been hanging in the crook of her left elbow swung over with unusual coincidence. The long dagger entered the bamboo basket. After a series of hissing sounds, it turned into a sky full of bamboo shavings. A faint fragrance, accompanied by a wave of white smoke, quickly spread out between the two of them. Haitong's brows furrowed again. She held her breath and pushed off with the tip of her foot, intending to retreat temporarily. Unexpectedly, 3 crossbow bolts shot out silently from the white smoke. By the time she discovered them, they were already a foot in front of her. If it had been a normal 9th-level ace, they would have had to hold their breath after their breath had been slightly disturbed. Inevitably, they would have felt a bit depressed in their chest and abdomen. Suddenly encountering Fan Xian's crossbow technique, it would have been difficult to dodge. But Haitang was a legendary Tian Mai. She waved her hand coldly, and the flowery cloth that had been wrapped around her head opened with a whoosh. It flattened in front of her face, unmoving in the wind like a piece of iron. Clang, clang, clang. The 3 crossbow bolts seemed to have hit an iron plate, and shattered inch by inch. The flowery cloth in Haitong's hand also dispiritedly and powerlessly shattered into several pieces. Fan Xian's sneak attacks had all failed. Haitang slowly pulled out the dagger from her clothes. Her face was expressionless. She flipped her hand and threw it. The dagger was like a bolt of lightning, splitting the faint poisonous smoke. It followed a strange path and suddenly appeared in front of Fan Xian. Fan Xian's hands crossed, and the tyrannical Xueqi in his body rushed out. With a snap, he caught the dagger between his palms. He felt a burning pain in his palms. He knew that his opponent's pure Xueqi was still attached to the blade of the dagger. It was incomparably sharp. A shadow floated over. Haitong's figure seemed to be not a hair slower than the flying dagger. Immediately after, she arrived on Fan Xian's body. Very calmly, she gripped the hilt of the dagger and gently turned it. The blade was incomparably sharp. It was about to cut Fan Xian's palms. Fan Xian gave a muffled grunt. He circulated his Xueqi to his palms, making it impossible for Haitong's dagger to turn around. Haitang furrowed her brows slightly. She seemed to be surprised that the Xueqi coming from the dagger was so tyrannical. But she did not make any extra movements. She naturally pulled out the dagger and stabbed it toward Fan Xian's face. It was a very simple movement and a very natural movement, but it made Fan Xian feel that he could not dodge it. His palms hurt slightly. The dagger between his palms had already disappeared. In the next moment, it had arrived between his eyebrows. Haitang let out a low cry. Her face was full of anger. Her entire body floated up. Below her abdomen was the black dagger that Fan Xian had pulled out from somewhere. 2 young warriors, one standing on the meadow, the other flying in the air. Fan Xian's sharp strike caused Haitong's natural strike to fail. Her body quickly spun in a circle on Fan Xian's body. The flowery clothing on her body opened up like a flower. It was somewhat dazzling. A hand reached out from the flower and slapped toward Fan Xian's chest. Fan Xian's eyes narrowed slightly. He did not dodge. His right palm carried a tyrannical and barbaric Xueqi and slapped toward Haitang's soft chest in the flower. Haitang retreated again. She tilted her body and struck out with her sword. A number of clangs rang out. As the wind from the palm gradually died down, the tips of the two swords collided countless times. A moment later, Haitang lowered her head slightly. Her right hand held the sword and slid back. The cloth wrapped around her hair had long been shredded into several pieces. At this moment, her black hair flowed down like a waterfall. Although she was still wearing the coarse clothing, the way she held the sword was as elegant and beautiful as a fairy from the ninth heaven. There was no trace of a village girl's temperament. On the other side, Fan Xian stared at her. His hand tightly gripping the dagger was trembling slightly. A feeling of defeat rose in his heart. His moves were not as good as this woman's, but even the tyrannical Xueqi that he had always been so proud of seemed to be at a complete disadvantage in front of this woman's calm and pure Xueqi. In reality, Haitang was even more astonished. Ever since she had left her apprenticeship, she had met who knew how many experts. Fan Xian was clearly not the strongest. His strength was at most at the threshold of the 9th level, but it was Fan Xian who had put her in the most difficult position. Fan Xian was only unwilling to show weakness in front of a woman. This was a sour feeling in his bones. Haitang was a peerless warrior above the 9th level. If he had been facing Yan Xueqi, perhaps he would have fled long ago. But facing a village girl, he had stubbornly and stupidly chosen to attack. Fortunately, his method of attack was extremely shameless. It was completely different from a battle between ordinary strong warriors. Haitang stared at his handsome face and suddenly showed a look of disgust. Among the younger generation, Master Fan can be considered an expert. But your methods are so shameless. Where is the spirit of martial arts? She was right. Earlier, Fan Xian had said that they would compete in martial arts, but he had used a dagger to mount a sneak attack. In the end, he had used poison smoke and crossbow arrows, dragon claws to grab breasts, and performing on the street with a sword. Haitang had never seen such a shameless person. Fan Xian took 2 deep breaths and calmed the slightly disorderly breath in his chest. He forced a smile. I have never been a martial arts master. Naturally, I will not abide by any Zhonghu rules. I am the commissioner of the Overwatch Council of the Kingdom of Qing. I am an official. You are from northern Qi. Now that you have trespassed our borders and are standing on Qing soil, I only need to capture you and punish you. What methods do I use? Haitang was silent. She seemed to agree with his explanation. She slowly closed her eyes and took a deep breath. That unusually natural and beautiful aura began to strengthen around her body. The dew in the meadow beside her seemed to be jumping with joy. It struggled down the grass and turned into a faint mist. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes. He knew that when he had struck her chest with his palm and stabbed her private parts, he had angered this proud daughter of heaven. Like a gust of wind, or like a glimmer of light, this early morning spring wind blew gently on the meadow. The tip of Haitang's dagger followed the wind, borrowing the light and shadow. It was incomparably gentle and natural as it stabbed towards Fan Xian. This second attack was gentler than before, but Fan Xian knew that it was also more dangerous. His legs were a bit numb. The after-effects of a night of fierce fighting had finally flared up. Furthermore, he was facing a 9th-level peerless warrior. He knew that he could not fight her head-on. He did not have that strength. So, Fan Xian abandoned the dagger and pulled back his palms. Narrowing his eyes slightly, he no longer attacked. Relying solely on every bit of contact between his skin and the air, he began to dodge that seemingly natural dagger. Many years ago he had done this. At that time, Wu Zhu had held a wooden stick. Today he had done it again. His opponent had held a dagger. Wu Zhu could hit him, but Haitang was not Wu Zhu. Even if she was a peerless warrior above the 9th level, she was still far from Wu Zhu. Chapter 200. The dagger in Haitang's hand was like the breath of the wind, wrapping around Fan Xian in strands. Fan Xian jumped, leaped, squatted, or lay down, making all sorts of strange and comical postures. Between each pose, he used his powerful body control to ensure the consistency of the postures. The tip of the dagger pierced the mud next to his left ear, pierced through the grass under his right pinky, and picked up the dewdrop by his throat. It just couldn't pierce his body. A strange look gradually appeared in Haitong's eyes. She had practiced martial arts since she was a child, and her talent was peerless. She was confident that the dagger in her hand had long obtained the way of nature. Other than the 4 great grandmasters, she had never looked upon anyone else as a threat. The young man before her, Fan Xian, was no match for her in any way. But why was it that even though he was in such a sorry state, the dagger in her hand was still lacking? Every time she was about to stab him, his body seemed to predict it, and at the most dangerous moment, he would move a few inches away. The sweat on Fan Xian's forehead was already dripping. The situation was too dangerous, and there were many times when he had almost lost his life to the dagger. Although the dagger in his opponent's hand was not as fast or accurate as Wu Zhu's, it was truly marvelous. He felt a bit of regret. He shouldn't have dodged. He should have done what he had done earlier and fought to the death, using his valiance to overwhelm his opponent's indifference. But the situation had come to this, and there was no other way. In this moment of life and death, Fan Xian rolled on the wet grass, dodging in a sorry state. He had no chance to complain about Wu Zhu's level of education, and his own lack of talent in martial arts. With a sharp sound, a black arrow pierced through the air, heading straight for Haitong's face. Haitong's entire attention was on Fan Xian. Seeing that she was about to kill him, she only lightly turned around, and the arrow swept past her cheek. Immediately after, 2 more arrows, and then 3 more. A rain of arrows accurately avoided Fan Xian, who was rolling around like a puppy. Dense and murderous, they dodged toward Haitong's body. Haitong sighed softly in her heart. She pulled back her dagger, sweeping away the arrows one by one. She found that her wrist was also a bit numb. She couldn't help but be surprised. The light bows of the cavalry could actually shoot arrows with such power. Immediately after, a long knife flew over like a hot knife through butter. This was Tiger Guard Gao Da's flying knife. The tip of the blade stabbed fiercely into the ground in front of Haitong, forcing this expert back several steps. The sound of hooves thundered. The Black Knights outside the small town had finally arrived on the meadow. More than 100 steeds stomped their hooves uneasily, as if they were afraid of the air on the meadow. The masked Black Knights on the horses all raised the longbows in their hands and aimed them at the peerless expert in the clothes of a village girl. "You're lucky." Haitong's body floated lightly and pulled a long distance away from this terrifying group of riders. She then gently stroked her long hair and spoke to Fan Xian, who was climbing to his feet with some difficulty. Fan Xian smiled bitterly and did not argue. Looking at the village girl standing in the distance, he waved goodbye. The meadow quieted down. The Black Knights heard the command and dismounted one by one. They shouted in unison, "Greetings, Commissioner." Fan Xian turned around and looked at these powerful riders, their bodies emanating a cold aura. His heart finally calmed down. He said tiredly, "There's poison here. In a bit, the horses will be restless. Be careful." Back in the camp, the accompanying doctor had already taken out some things to treat Fan Xian's wounds. Casually wrapping him up, Fan Xian walked into the tent with a grave expression. He ordered his subordinates to rest for the day. Tomorrow, they would enter Wudu. Who was it? Fan Xian was not in a good mood. He looked coldly at Wang Qinian. Wang Qinian bowed and replied, "The one who opened the carriage door was someone from Xinyang. The spy in the council should also have some connection to Xinyang. As for the soldiers outside Wudu, although they were disguised, we have already found out that they are the private soldiers of Northern Qi's General L.V. Jing. This L.V. Jing served in Shang Shanhu's army 10 years ago. Since then, she has risen through the ranks rapidly." Fan Xian nodded. He realized that the small wound on his shoulder was beginning to hurt. He frowned. "I can guess at the relationship between Xiao En and Shang Shanhu, so it is normal for L.V. Jing to come. As for Xinyang, this time, Xiao En was able to get out of prison because of Xinyang's methods. But I don't know why they arranged for a prisoner rescue when they could have safely reached Shangjing." He had a headache. He could not understand what agreement the eldest princess had with Northern Qi. It is clear that the eldest princess and Shang Shanhu do not wish for Xiaoan to fall into the hands of the royal family of Northern Qi. Wang Qinian analyzed. It seems that the secrets that Xiaoan holds are what the royal family of Northern Qi wants, but Xiaoan himself is not what they want. If that is the case, Then even if Xueqi safely reaches northern Qi, I'm afraid he will die of old age in prison instead of regaining his power. No wonder he was in such a hurry to escape. Fan Xian frowned and spoke to himself. It seems that the young emperor of northern Qi is not an idiot. I'm afraid he also understands the relationship between Shang Shanhu and Xueqi. But what kind of secret could it be that the royal family of northern Qi is so concerned about? Why would even He send Haitang to silence him? Why would Chen Pingping be willing to let Xueqi go? Why wouldn't he be willing to kill him back then? I feel so stupid. Fan Xian looked at the heavily injured Xueqi and rested his chin on his hand, deep in thought. This was how things were in the world. Before he had fought Xueqi, he was a tiger. Only after fighting him did he realize that he was only a paper tiger. He thought to himself that what his mother had taught Chen Pingping was indeed very reasonable. He continued. I clearly wanted to kill you, but after all this effort, at the last moment, I became your bodyguard. The development of this matter was truly absurd. Xueqi's old voice rang out. The affairs of the world are always like this. If they were not absurd, they would not be affairs of the world. Fan Xian smiled. But the temptation to kill you is still very great. Haitang is Xueqi's student. In northern Qi, no one dares to disobey the words of that baldy, Xueqi said lightly. Xueqi said indifferently, since she knows I'm alive, then you can't justify framing the corpses outside the town. If you kill me now, I'm afraid it'll be very difficult for that young Master Yan to return alive. What kind of secret are you hiding in your heart? Fan Xian looked at him calmly. Something that could make Xueqi lose all decorum and come to kill you. Just some old stories. When we were on the meadow, talking about the secret in your heart, it was then that she revealed herself and revealed her murderous intent. Fan Xian looked at him indifferently. It seems that secret is indeed extraordinary, to be able to throw a 9th-level master's state of mind into chaos. Xueqi looked at him mockingly. Why don't you think that she was preparing to kill you? I have no enmity with her. Why would she want to kill me? Fan Xian stared into Xueqi's eyes. It seemed that those eyes, which were no longer filled with the scent of blood, wanted to see the long-hidden secret. You're wrong. Xueqi smiled gently. Since leaving the Overwatch Council's prison, the cold aura that had surrounded him had long since disappeared. It seems that Xueqi does not wish for you to return to northern Qi alive. Correct. The reason why I dared to take the risk of escaping, despite knowing that it was a trap set by you, was because I knew that in the end, neither the royal family of northern Qi nor the eldest princess, whom I have never met, would let me die so easily. Perhaps the eldest princess you speak of wants to use my life and death to reach some sort of agreement with who. After all, she is too young, and does not know some of the secrets of the past. More importantly, continued Xueqi, Xueqi wants me to shut up, so he will try to kill me before the diplomatic mission leaves the country. And you are a very curious person. You must be wondering what kind of secret it is that would provoke him to come after me. Since that is the case, you can only change from the person who will kill me to the person who will protect me. Fan Xian was silent. You set a trap, I broke it, and in the end I failed. But I had one last thing to rely on. I only had to play my final card, and you would not be willing to kill me. Tomorrow, when we enter the country, you will have no chance to strike. So this time you have lost. Xueqi's face was expressionless. Although this wily old fox was not as strong as he had been in the past, his calculative mind seemed to be able to see through everyone's hearts. I am indeed interested in that card of yours, even more than anyone else. I admit that is enough for me to spare your life for now. Fan Xian did not seem disheartened. Instead he smiled. But you did not escape. When we reach Shangjing, Shang Shanhu will not be able to save you. You will still be imprisoned by the royal family of northern Qi, tortured until you die of old age, waiting for you to reveal that secret. A sudden look of fear flashed through Xueqi's eyes. After this old man had been injured today, it seemed that even his mental defenses had weakened. What kind of secret is it? Fan Xian repeated the words he had said in the meadow. If you are not afraid of death, why do you not dare to say it? Don't tell me what is more terrifying than death. I don't believe such nonsense. It seemed that Xueqi had only just discovered the coldness in the depths of Fan Xian's heart. He smiled and closed his mouth. Fan Xian suddenly closed his eyes and thought for a moment. His hand moved like the wind, and he gently removed the poisonous needle from Xueqi's neck. Ever since this needle had been inserted into Xueqi's acupoint in the fir forest, it had not been removed. As the needle slowly left Xueqi's body, the old man suddenly gave a muffled grunt. A pained expression appeared on his face, and the wounds on his body began to bleed. This needle can block the circulation of your blood, but in reality, it is also helping to staunch your bleeding. After it is removed, you will probably only be able to count to 20 before you die from excessive blood loss, Fan Xian said softly. He gently moved the needle between his fingers. This is the only weapon that I have trained in, so I have always been very careful with it. Blood flowed from Xueqi's body, soaking his clothes and dripping onto his chair. The old man's face grew paler, and the smell of old age on his body grew stronger, as if it were gradually transforming into the smell of death. But his mouth remained tightly shut. Drip, drip. After an indeterminable amount of time, Fan Xian slightly frowned. His fingers stretched out like lightning, and once again pierced into another acupoint of Xueqi's, helping to staunch the bleeding. Then, he carefully smeared some knockout powder on the half-conscious Xueqi's nose. Chapter 201. The bitter smell entered his nose, and Xueqi slowly woke up. He looked at Fan Xian with an indescribable expression, and said with difficulty, "I believe Chen Pingping must be very disappointed in you. If you want to kill me, you kill me. If you want to let me go, you let me go. If you keep repeating things, how can you achieve anything great in the future?" Fan Xian's face was full of indifference. "Everyone else thinks I will kill you, but I won't. What's there to be afraid of? As long as I can obtain the information I want at the end of the story, I am happy to be a repeated villain." Although he said this, he still slowly lowered his eyes. He knew that Xueqi was using his curiosity to his advantage. He knew that Xueqi had a secret that even the royal family of Northern Qi and a grandmaster were interested in. If he were to kill Xueqi, he would not be satisfied. His plan to kill Xueqi had been ruined by an inexplicable secret, and by an inexplicable village girl. Fan Xian was not the least bit depressed. He had learned from a young age to endure and accept the disharmony between plans and changes. After a while, he suddenly smiled. "If I capture Zhuang Mohan to threaten you, will you reveal that secret?" Xueqi slowly raised his head, and there was a trace of shock in his lifeless eyes. It seemed that he had not expected the young man in front of him to know that he and Zhuang Mohan were brothers. Of course, a venomous snake like you, someone who only thinks about your own survival, would probably ignore Zhuang Mohan, even though he has done many things for you. Fan Xian continued to look at Xueqi with that oppressive smile. Suddenly he had a thought and said coldly, "So if there is a chance in the future, I hope you will tell me this secret. Otherwise, if I find out the secret of the temple, I will personally kill Zhuang Mohan." The temple? The temple! After 2 consecutive attacks, Xueqi made a hoarse sound from his throat. He raised his weak arm and pointed at Fan Xian, his eyes full of shock. It seemed that he wanted to know how Fan Xian knew that the secret he was guarding had something to do with the temple. Fan Xian satisfied Xueqi's curiosity, and said softly, "This deduction is based on my confidence in Chen Pingping. You say that Chen Pingping does not even know the secret you are guarding. That is simple. I believe that in all the world, the only thing Chen Pingping does not know is the matter of the temple. Since you have such a big secret, then I will protect you from being killed by Hai Tang," Fan Xian said with a hint of mockery. He could not help but think of his uncle with the black cloth. He thought that if Wu Zhu's memory were recovered, wouldn't going to the temple be like going home? This was just what he was thinking, but he still couldn't kill Xueqi right now. One reason was that Hai Tang was nearby, and it would be difficult to use the surprise attack outside the town as an excuse. On the other hand, because of his mother, Fan Xian really wanted to know where the temple was. Furthermore, it seemed that the damned Uncle Wu Zhu would never be able to find his past. He spoke to the sinister Xueqi. "Since you dared to run and I," he said. And said N and Fan. And Xiao Fan. Because he had Fan and N Fan. Fan. And he Fan. Fan Xian got back into the car. Facing the sinister Xueqi, he calmly said, "Since you dared to escape and I can't bear to kill you, I'll have to break your legs as the price. I am not Chen Pingping. Your so-called secret is not like chili peppers in my food. If you want to threaten me with suicide, go ahead. But you are too close to home. I don't think you have the courage to kill yourself." Saying this, he smiled and got out of the carriage. Shawan looked at the blood seeping from his broken legs. There was a faint worry in his eyes. He knew that this young man of the Overwatch Council would grow into a terrifying figure in the south. He looked at the camp under the midday sun. He thought about how his plan was far from perfect, and how it had produced an absurd result. Fortunately, while Shawan was in a state of shock, with the help of the sleeping incense, Fan Xian was able to confirm that Shawan's secret had something to do with the temple. Otherwise, he would have formed an irreconcilable enmity with the swordsman Haitang. This plan would not have been worth it. In the distance, the restless neighing of the horses could be heard from the Black Knight's camp. Fan Xian squinted and looked in that direction. He knew that the poison he had placed on the meadow was beginning to take effect. He waved his hand to summon a tiger guard and had him go to the Black Knights to pass on the order. If there are mares, then it will be easy. If that doesn't work, then get some clean water and wash them. The tiger guard took his orders and left. Fan Xian smiled and got into Sea Lily's carriage. He slumped back into the chair. Strangely, facing this woman, even though he knew that she was one of the masterminds who wanted to kill him last year, he still felt incomparably relaxed. It was as if the faint fragrance in the carriage had already become some kind of excellent medicine under the effect of habit. Sea Lily helped him take off his blood-stained clothes and carefully washed him with warm water. The towel slid across Fan Xian's naked and well-proportioned body. It was slightly hot. "Have you seen Haitang?" Fan Xian suddenly asked with his eyes closed. Sea Lily frowned. She seemed to be recalling her life in the northern Qi palace. Xueqi's female disciple. Sea Lily suddenly understood. "You mean Duo? Fan Xian frowned. "I met her today." He then told her what had happened and frowned. "I thought she would be like a fairy. Who would have thought that she was like a village girl?" The way she spoke and the way she put her hands on her hips, it was hard to tell that she was a powerful master. Duo is not an ordinary person. Sea Lily looked at him worriedly. She has been obsessed with martial arts since she was a child. As for poetry, calligraphy, and painting, she has no interest at all. Instead, she opened a vegetable garden in Xueqi's courtyard. Every day, aside from practicing martial arts, she grows vegetables and flowers. Fan Xian was a little surprised. This kind of behavior was quite similar to that of King Jing. He guessed why Haitang would live such a life. The martial arts of Xueqi's branch followed the path of harmony between man and nature. They paid particular attention to being close to nature. Since Haitang had a talent for cultivation, it was only natural that she would hide in the vegetable garden every day. It seemed that her village girl appearance was not a deliberate act. "Be careful. She's very powerful." Sea Lily teased Fan Xian. She used a dry towel to dry the water on his body. "I reckon that you almost didn't make it back today." That was indeed the situation at the time. But Fan Xian raised his eyebrows. With a strange smile, he said, "Although my martial cultivation is not as good as hers if we really fought, I think that at this time, she would probably feel much worse than me." Sea Lily looked at him with a smile. "After you enter the border of northern Qi, if Haitang comes to kill you, I won't speak up for you." Fan Xian smiled and shook his head. "After we enter the border of northern Qi, if she dares to kill me, I will take off my clothes and let her kill me. That is, if she isn't afraid of starting a war between the two countries." He suddenly looked at Sea Lily's soft body and thought of that night on the pleasure boat. He thought of the medicine he had used that time. He couldn't help but think of Haitang, whose whereabouts were unknown. It was as if he could feel her dagger, which seemed to be one with heaven and earth, still around his neck. It was cold and threatening. He shivered, and Sea Lily thought he was cold. She quickly covered him with a shirt. Only Fan Xian knew that he was afraid. He was afraid of the dagger in Haitang's hand. Today, if the 7 tiger guards and the Black Knights had not arrived in time, he could have died at her hands. A superior 9th-level ace was indeed not someone he could fight against. Yan Xiaoyi could shoot him off the city walls with one arrow. Although he had improved since then, he was still far from Haitang's level. The matter itself was strange. The bravery Fan Xian had displayed in the 2 battles in the span of one night and one morning was far beyond what he could accept. He was a person who would rather use assassination than use martial power to fight for his life. After a long time, Fan Xian sighed in his heart. Speechless, he asked the heavens, "That damned Uncle Wu Zhu. Didn't he know to tell me that he wasn't following me? Give me the chest, give me the chest." In the distant reeds by the lake on the border of the country, a head suddenly appeared in the shallow, cold water. The lake water flowed down along the hair. Hai Tang, the brilliant disciple of a grandmaster, the Tian Mai being worshipped by Northern Qi, revealed her naked upper body. A trace of anger appeared on her face. She had already forced out the poison for an hour. Unexpectedly, it had not been completely forced out. It was as if there was a ball of fire burning incessantly inside her body. Even the cold lake water could not dispel the glimmer of lust in her heart. Hai Tang bit her lower lip, and the tip of her nose twitched slightly. She finally understood what had happened. The hatred in her eyes flared, and she cursed in a low voice. "Shameless Fan Xian!" Fan Xian had not used poison, but an aphrodisiac. A good aphrodisiac would not cause any harm to the human body. Hai Tang's use of Xueqi to force out the poison had actually caused the drug to circulate faster in her body. No wonder in this early spring cold lake, the girl's mind was still flying and her body was boiling hot. Hai Tang sighed softly, thinking of what the man called Fan Xian had said. He was an official, but he was also a man of martial arts. As a 9th-level master, he used such despicable means. But there were still many things she did not understand. When the poisonous smoke had come out, she had clearly held her breath. Could it be that during the fight, in a moment of carelessness, she had breathed in some remnant of the drug? She suddenly raised her right hand and frowned as she examined it. Only then did she discover that there was a small burn mark between her thumb and index finger. This burn mark did not hurt at all. It must have been caused by the poison on the needle. Hai Tang had always thought highly of herself, and had never cared about any poison in the world. That was why she had been able to pinch it with her hand. But she had not expected Fan Xian's poisoning method to be so complicated. First, he had used the poison on the needle to burn a small opening, and then let the medicinal mist touch her body and escape through the small opening. First, he had used the poison needle to burn her skin, and then he had used the aphrodisiac to confuse her mind. Her body was tired of spring, and the heavens had descended upon Fan Xian in great anger. Chapter 202. Hai Tang grunted softly, seemingly in pain. She dove back into the ice-cold bottom of the lake, wanting to expel the burning flame in her body. Her body rolled, crouched, and swam. From the surface of the lake, she looked like a white fish swimming with graceful postures. The fishes in the distance also followed, carefully swimming beside her naked body. After a long time, the lake exploded with a white splash. Hai Tang broke through the water and swept to the lakeside. A cool breeze stirred. She had already put on her coarse clothes. This woman was not very beautiful, but there was always a faint rustic feeling in her eyes. She was very amiable. Her eyes were unusually clear, reflecting the white birds on the surface of the lake. At this moment, however, there were 2 traces of anger in them. "Fan Xian, I'm going to kill you." It was clear that the poison had failed again. Fan Xian awoke from his meditative state and strolled leisurely through the camp. Northern Qi's ambush troops had already been slaughtered by the Black Knights, and the corpses on the battlefield were the best proof. At this time, there were already envoys crossing Wudu to express their strongest protest to Northern Qi. "It's a pity." Wang Qinian followed behind him and sighed. It wasn't easy to calculate the location of the other party's attack and push the blame for Shaowen's death to the other party. All kinds of evidence have also been arranged very well. Shaowen's death was originally in the master's plan, but unexpectedly, that woman ruined everything. Fan Xian shook his head and walked over to a tree. Looking at the mist drifting over from a distant valley, he said quietly, "Perhaps I ruined her plan. Although Shaowen didn't die in the right place at the right time, it's fine. At least I know what he was hiding. Let's torture him." Wang Qinian began to come up with a rotten idea. Fan Xian stared at him and said coldly, "Chen Pingping used 20 years of torture to no avail. Do you think we can make any progress in 2 short days? Then what do we do? Do we really hand Xiaowen over to the north?" Although Wang Qinian didn't know what Xiaowen knew, as an official of the Overwatch Council, he really didn't want to hand over the secret to the enemy in the north. Give it to Northern Qi for now. In any case, the people there who want to kill him are very powerful, and the people who want to protect him are also very powerful. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and wondered if he really had to use that chest. But the chest was not by his side, and he did not know where Uncle Wu Zhu was. Let's not think about this anymore. Fan Xian shook his head. Prepare to cross Wudu tomorrow. Be careful of that Haitang woman. If Xiaoan is killed within our borders, the responsibility will be ours. Should we send out the Shadow Knights to eliminate the target? You're just coming up with stupid ideas today. Fan Xian coughed and found that there was still some pain in his chest and abdomen. Leaning on the tree trunk, he said, if it was a battle between two armies, even if it was a great grandmaster, if he encountered a formation of Black Knights, he could only float away. However, if he used the Black Knights to search for people, he would probably be silently cut down one by that girl's dagger. You are very self-aware. A slightly angry voice came from the mountain path in front of him. A woman dressed in coarse clothes and with long hair that fell over her shoulders stared at Fan Xian. This place was about 30 meters away from the camp. The tiger guards, who had worked all night, had been ordered by Fan Xian to rest. Wang Qinian looked at Fan Xian and was shocked. He knew that this was the superior 9th-level ace who had almost killed Commissioner Fan that morning, Haitang of Northern Qi. Fan Xian's expression was calm. He waved his hand and said, "Go back." Wang Qinian didn't say anything. He ran back to the camp with his head down, thinking that he had to quickly wake up Gao Da and the other silent aces. The horses of the Black Knights were in heat today, and he didn't know what had befallen them. Fan Xian tilted his head slightly and looked at Haitang. "Aren't you afraid he'll call for help?" he asked quietly. "Aren't you afraid I'll immediately kill you? This isn't morning. I believe I can cut Master Fan down in 3 rounds. You can try, if the poison in your body is cleared." Fan Xian's tone was somewhat frivolous. Haitang bit her lip and looked at Fan Xian with clear eyes full of resentment. After a while, she spat out 2 words. "Shameless." Fan Xian gently licked his dry lips and narrowed his eyes at Haitang. With a face full of shamelessness, he quickly responded. "Thank you. Give me the antidote." "Why should I? If you don't give it to me, I'll kill you," Haitang said fiercely. Fan Xian's sharp eyes saw that there was some panic in the girl's eyes. "If you kill me, you'll be soaking in the North Sea every day." Fan Xian seemed somewhat unrestrained. The negotiations were in a mess. No one was willing to admit defeat, and no one was able to proceed to the next step of the exchange of benefits. The man and woman stared at each other like 2 children throwing a tantrum. They looked at each other under the tree on the mountain road, and it looked somewhat comical. "Did you kill Xiaoan?" Haitang suddenly changed the subject. Looking at him, she said, "If you are worried about my existence, I can pretend I don't know about it. I came south this time not to stop you from killing him. In fact, you and I have a common goal." Fan Xian shook his head. "I really do want to kill Xiaoan, but since you want to kill him, I have to keep him alive." "Why?" "There is no reason." Fan Xian naturally wouldn't tell her. He also wanted to know the secret in Xiaoan's heart. Haitang was furious. With a clang, she drew her sword. Today, the sword no longer had its natural gentleness. The sword's aura soared to the sky, and it accurately cut a tree that had sprouted without flowers. The corners of Fan Xian's eyes twitched. Although his face remained calm, deep in his heart he was shocked. If this village girl really wanted to kill him, he really wouldn't know what to do without the Black Knights and the Tiger Guards by his side. Suddenly, Haitang's eyebrows twitched. She walked towards the back of the mountain path and turned her head to Fan Xian. "I don't like dealing with random people. Are you coming? Are you coming?" What kind of invitation was this? Was it the abyss of death, or a sweet pile of sugar? Fan Xian smiled and clasped his hands behind his back. He followed her. As an official of the Overwatch Council, there was no other person who would act as willfully as he did. To put it more seriously, this was an irresponsible act that didn't take his own life seriously. Watching the man and woman disappear at the end of the mountain path, there were a few swishing sounds. Several figures flew out from behind the branches of the trees and gathered together. Gao Da carried a long knife. He frowned at the mountain path and asked Wang Qinian, "Master Wang, we should follow them." Wang Qinyan's face showed some worry. Master is exceptionally wise, but a bit too lustful. Fan Xian naturally didn't follow because he coveted Haitang's beauty. He just knew that his following conversation with this woman couldn't fall into the ears of outsiders. Otherwise, Haitang would fly into a rage out of humiliation. She would no longer be threatened by him, and even if she had to die, she would kill him. I can detoxify this poison. Fan Xian looked calmly at the woman leaning against the tree. He looked at her damp flowery clothes. But I need a promise from you. I won't accept your threats. I'm not threatening you. A slightly sad expression appeared on Fan Xian's face. I am an official of the Overwatch Council of the Kingdom of Qing. You have entered deep into the country and vainly attempted to kill the felons I am escorting. So I must use all means at my disposal to stop you. Do you think I would feel proud of using such despicable methods? His lips curled into a self-deprecating smile at the right time. Haitang was slightly startled. After a moment of silence, she suddenly said, What do you want me to promise? From here to the north of Wudu, there should still be a day's journey. I hope you won't strike during that day. Haitang looked at him calmly. You know very well that once you enter the kingdom of Qi, I can't strike again. Why? Fan Xian appeared surprised. Because I am a citizen of the kingdom of Qi. I must consider the people of this country. I cannot break this agreement in my own country. If I anger the royal family, and the two countries go to war again, the dead and wounded will not be the unarmed people. A faint look of worry appeared in Haitang's eyes. But I don't want Xiao En to return to northern Qi alive. Fan Xian listened calmly, but in his heart, he gradually came to a sense of propriety. It seemed that it was as Sea Lily said. This superior 9th-level master before him really was a country girl, bemoaning the state of the universe and pitying the fate of mankind? This was the good moral character that Fan Xian liked most in his enemies. Why did you kill Xiao En? Strangely, a look of disapproval and disgust appeared in Haitang's eyes. Don't you know that if Xiao En dies, that high-ranking official of yours who fell into the hands of the court will also die? Fan Xian was silent. Of course, he wouldn't tell her the darkest side of himself. He smiled slightly. I didn't kill him, did I? Even if Xiao En dies, it is still your northern Qi's responsibility. You sent troops to infiltrate our country. Do you think you can wash away suspicion? As for Master Yan, I believe I can bring him back to the kingdom of Qing. He paused, then asked curiously, Why did you kill Xiao En? His expression was a little naive, even a little stupid. Haitang looked at him with disgust. I don't need to explain it to you. Fan Xian shrugged his shoulders and took out a pill from his robes. The aphrodisiac that you have is something I developed myself, he said quietly. You cannot force it out with Xueqi. Having said this, he tossed the pill far away. Haitang's expression was one of anger, then embarrassment. She was angry again and again, her expression changing constantly. She caught the pill and looked at him coldly. I didn't agree to it. Why are you willing to give me the antidote? Fan Xian sighed and turned his body so that his wide and solid back was facing the woman behind him. His hand gently held onto a new branch as he looked at the mountain valley's first green staining the peaks and the wild flowers on the mountain slope in the distance. Chapter 203. Last night, the rain was light and the wind was strong. Deep sleep did not sober the wine. Ask the curtain rollers, and they say Haitang is still the same. Do you know it should be green fat and red thin? Fan Xian softly recited from beneath the tree. His voice was gentle, but it was unclear whether he was talking about a person or an object. This was the first time since that night in front of the palace that the immortal of poetry, Fan Xian, had composed a poem. This girl called Haitang quietly looked at that slender and even somewhat thin body. She gradually loosened her grip on the dagger. If you want to fight, then I will fight. Fan Xian suddenly turned around. His face was full of smiles, but he still carried a look of unswerving determination as he looked at Haitang. It's only one day. I would like to see, even if I do not use those half-drunk methods, whether or not I can protect Xiaowen's old life from Haitang's hands. Drunken tricks? Of course it meant drunken spring. Haitang's expression was calm. It was impossible to tell what she was thinking. It seemed that she had not expected that after reciting that poem, Fan Xian would reveal the backbone and courage that a man should have. As a proud daughter of heaven, she had unexpectedly suffered such a setback at Fan Xian's hands. She had not expected that Fan Xian would have the courage to face her alone. At this moment, she truly did not understand the young official in front of her. She could not help but frown slightly. But it seemed that she was interested in something else. She quietly said, "Master Fan, I have heard that you will no longer compose poetry. Why are you in the mood today?" "When I see the pine, I think of winter. When I see the chrysanthemum, I think of autumn. When I see the crabapple, I think of..." Fan Xian swallowed the word spring just in time. He looked at Haitang with a smile. "Poetry is at the end of the road. It is useless for the country and its people. I have some reputation for poetry in the kingdom of Qing, but I do not have the patience to recite these lines on Sundays. This poem was written by chance after a storm last year. Today, seeing the spirit in Haitang's frail appearance, I could not help but recite it. I hope you do not blame me for being absurd." Haitang raised her head and squinted at Fan Xian. She suddenly smiled. "I don't care if you are putting on an act or trying to weaken my will. I just feel that what you said earlier was reasonable. You are an official of the kingdom of Qing, and it is your freedom to use whatever methods you want, so I will not hold a grudge against you. As for Master Fan's earlier poem, perhaps it was a good one, but I have never been an expert in this field, so naturally I do not understand its meaning. All I know is that the crabapple cannot be soaked in the rain. If the water accumulates in the pot, the roots will rot. Regardless of whether it is green or red, I fear it will become a pot of rotten fruit." Having said this, she turned and walked back. A few moments later, she had disappeared into the quiet mountain forest, leaving behind only a faint fragrance, a few bird cries, and an embarrassed Fan Xian. Why did Miss Hua leave? Fan Xian seemed to have lost something. He sighed. "I was going to tell you a story about a mushroom-picking girl." Haitang left with ease, and Fan Xian returned with ease. He patted his buttocks, clasped his hands behind his back, and slowly walked back along the moss-covered mountain road. After a few steps, he saw the 7 tiger guards on the other side of the road, who looked as if they were facing a great enemy. Wang Qinian led a group of Overwatch Council officials and hid in the grass, ready to attack at any moment. Seeing the commissioner return safely, everyone let out a collective sigh of relief. The Overwatch Council officials hiding in the grass also stood up, but their faces and bodies were covered in grass stains, which made them look very comical. "Master, is that it?" Wang Qinian frowned as he followed behind Fan Xian. "This Haitang is a 9th-level master according to our intelligence reports, and Northern Qi always says she is a Tian Mai. No matter how you look at it, she seems quite ordinary. And she did not make a move on you, master?" "Make a move on me?" Fan Xian heard the vile meaning in Wang Qinian's words. If she had made a move on me, would I be able to walk back so calmly? He suddenly stopped and looked at Wang Qinian suspiciously. "You used to be an expert at tracking people, so your hearing must be good." "Yes, master." Wang Qinian did not know what he meant. "Then did you hear my conversation with her just now?" Fan Xian's face was full of smiles, but it was full of pressure. Wang Qinian did not dare to hide anything. "I heard some of it." "What did you hear?" Wang Qinian's face was full of worry. "I heard a wonderful poem from Master, and I also heard something about medicine." Fan Xian warned him. "Do not reveal it. If the news that he had used an aphrodisiac on Haitang was made public, he would certainly offend all the people of Northern Qi, and Haitang would probably be so ashamed that she would cover her face with a flower basket before she dared to go out on the streets." "Yes." Wang Qinian was full of admiration. "Master is indeed not an ordinary person. With just a few simple words, you were able to send such a terrifying master away." Fan Xian paid no attention to his flattery. He only sank into deep thought. Today's matter seemed simple, but he had actually put a lot of thought into it. First of all, he had always referred to himself as an official. He wanted to make Haitang aware that this was not just a fight on the Jianghu, so that she would not fly into a rage because of the aphrodisiac and forget many things that she should pay attention to. As for Li Qingzhao's dream order, Fan Xian had shamelessly prepared it while he was in the capital. Ever since Yan Ruohai had told him about a strange woman in the north called Haitang, Fan Xian had begun to prepare this kind of numbing method. He had even prepared a poem by Han Yu called Lazy to get up. Last night it rained in the third watch, a chill before dawn. Are the Haitang flowers there? I lay on my side and roll up the curtains. But this poem was more intimate than Li Qingzhao's, so he did not dare to use it today. Fan Xian smiled slightly. He had deliberately said that he had felt something because of Haitang's delicateness. Thinking about it, the aphrodisiac must have made the girl very happy. She had been the female disciple of a grandmaster since she was a child, and was worshipped by the foolish common people as a Tian Mai. After she finished her apprenticeship, she was temporarily unrivaled. She was truly a heroine among women. But the more one was like this, the more one wanted to be seen by others as a weak character. A woman, even if she was a queen, was still a woman. Perhaps Fan Xian was not the most able person in the world to see through the minds of others, but he was certainly the man who understood the minds of women the best. Because in this world where men were superior to women, there was no man who was willing to use an equal attitude and a meticulous spirit to analyze what a woman wanted. Fan Xian was willing because he loved all women who were clean. That was why, although there were traces, he was still able to let the other party enjoy a few slaps on the buttocks. He took out the antidote that was identical to the one he had given Haitang from his bosom and swallowed it with a gurgle. "What medicine?" asked Wang Qinian curiously. Fan Xian tossed one to him. 6-fold tangerine peel pill. It clears away internal heat. Take it often. There was no antidote for the aphrodisiac that Fan Xian had concocted. Soak it in cold water and let it pass for a day. The aphrodisiac in Haitang's body was real, but the reason it had not been forced out was because of the reeds in Beihai Lake. Every spring, the cylindrical sheaths of those reeds would grow a kind of leaf-tongue hair. When this white hair fell into the water, it would interact with Fan Xian's medicine, making the woman's body feel numb and itchy, making her think that the poison was still lingering. Because of this, Haitang had silently accepted Fan Xian's agreement to exchange the antidote for her safety. Thinking of this, Fan Xian couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. He really was a very lucky man, but he didn't know when his luck would end. That day, the diplomatic mission stopped in the valley by the lake. Xiao En, with his broken leg, sat listlessly in the carriage. He knew that what awaited him would be imprisonment by the royal family of northern Qi. The people of the Zhan family had always been extremely fanatical. In order to find the whereabouts of the temple, they would certainly not let him off easy. And in order to prevent this from happening, He would probably use his power to kill him. As for Hua, the old man suddenly grew tired of the intrigue and thought that if he had died at Fan Xian's hands in the morning, perhaps that would have been a good ending. The diplomatic mission that had crossed the border had not yet returned, and was probably throwing a tantrum at the northern Qi officials. Indeed, the corpses outside Wudu had already been collected by the kingdom of Qing. These were the greatest evidence of the northern Qi army's trespassing and futile attempt to rescue the prisoners. In the current state of affairs, the kingdom of Qing was the main attacker, and the other countries were the main defenders. Fan Xian's diplomatic mission had no choice but to fly into a rage and take advantage of this opportunity to stir up trouble. After who knew how long, the northern Qi officials had finally calmed the Qing envoy's anger. The secret agreement and the open agreement had finally entered the next stage. The diplomatic mission's carriages formed a long procession, and they slowly circled around the shore of the North Sea Lake and turned into another valley. Fan Xian sat in the carriage, looking at the vast and boundless lake and the gradually rising mist. His face was expressionless, but his mood was somewhat complicated. The carriage pressed against the meadow, leaving deep tracks and turning over fresh soil. The four-wheeled carriage was moving with great force, and only then did it not sink into the wet meadow. Before entering the town, Fan Xian boarded Sea Lily's carriage for the last time. The two of them looked at each other in silence. After a while, Fan Xian said quietly, "After entering northern Qi, it will be inconvenient for me to visit you." Sea Lily nodded slightly, and her expression became much calmer. She said softly, "It has been hard on you all this way, sir." Fan Xian looked at the woman's soft and beautiful face, and the smooth curves of her body. He tilted his head slightly, as if he was about to say something. In the end, he reluctantly closed his mouth and left the carriage. The meadow outside the town of Wudu still bore the bloody traces of yesterday's battle. In the deepest patch of grass beneath the mound, there were still broken limbs and weapons. Fan Xian leaned against the carriage window and looked at the marks in the grass. He thought of the terrifying killing power of the Black Knights yesterday, and was secretly shocked. The corpses of the northern Qi people had already been transported back to their country. As for what compensation they would have to pay in the future, that was not something Fan Xian needed to consider right now. The carriages entered the town, but they did not stop. Under the gazes of the numb townsfolk, they slowly moved along the stone road, heading northeast. The curtain was still open. This was Fan Xian's personal habit. He liked to sit in the carriage and look at the people and scenery along the way. He did not want to have his eyes covered by a black cloth. Chapter 204. Wudu was a remote town on the border between the kingdom of Qing and northern Qi. Because it was not a battleground, no major battles had taken place there for many years. However, both sides had their own garrisons, so skirmishes were inevitable. When the two countries focused their trade and war efforts on the vassal states south of Wudu, the town became even more depressed and silent. Fan Xian knew that this town belonged to Northern Wei 20 years ago, and was later incorporated into the kingdom of Qing. So the townspeople did not feel close to the diplomatic mission. It seemed that it would take some time for the people of the country to truly accept the fact that their ruler had changed. The glazed tiles of the town reflected a dim light into the sky. Sitting in the carriage, Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and kept thinking about what he should do after entering northern Qi. The secret that Xiaowen spoke of was something that Fan Xian had to obtain. This was even more important than the mission and interests of the kingdom of Qing. Because the temple was connected to Uncle Wu Zhu, and the words his mother had left in the chest had revealed that she had once snuck into the temple and stolen something. A faint smile rose to the corners of Fan Xian's lips. He had never seen his mother, but, strangely, he loved that woman called Yi Qingmei very much. Thinking of how many years ago, a little girl had secretly run into an illusory temple that no one knew she was in, he sighed in admiration. He sighed in admiration of his mother's courage, and wisdom. Fan Xian knew that he was not as good as his mother, but this fact did not discourage him in the slightest. On the contrary, it made him more eager to face this seemingly beautiful, but actually very dangerous, second life. So he needed to know where the temple was, and then feel the place where his mother had stepped, and feel the scent that she had left behind. Outside Wudu was a small river, which was now the border between northern Qi and the kingdom of Qing. A temporary bridge had already been built across the river, and it could accommodate a single carriage. Officials from northern Qi and the official from the Chamberlain of Dependencies were waiting on the other side of the bridge for the diplomatic mission to arrive. On the other side of the river, the lethargic, sallow, and emaciated local soldiers were also on guard. Looking at the way they held their spears, one could not help but wonder if they were displaying the dignity of their country's military, or if they were hugging their spears to sleep. The first carriage stepped onto the bridge. The wheels of the carriage made contact with the undulating and simple wooden bridge, making a creaking sound. It looked as if the bridge could collapse at any time. It was a little scary. Fan Xian had already gotten off the carriage. He strolled to the other end of the bridge and greeted the northern Qi officials who had come to greet him. He then turned his head to watch the carriages behind him slowly roll over the bridge, one after the other. The bridge seemed to be increasingly unable to withstand the continuous violence, and the creaking grew louder. Seeming to notice Fan Xian's worry, the northern Qi official hurriedly explained, "I have. There is no problem." Fan Xian nodded. He knew that when two countries interacted, everything was judged by strength. There was no need for him to be overly friendly with this low-ranking official. His mind was mainly focused on the convoy of carriages. If Hai Tang truly wanted to silence Xiao En, then this bridge would be her last chance. As the female disciple of the Grandmaster Ku He, she had to be responsible for her master's reputation, as well as the safety of the people of northern Qi. So she could not act within the borders of her country. Suddenly, Fan Xian's heart skipped a beat. He slowly turned around and saw a forest of poplar trees on the southeastern bank of the river. The trees were thin, but they pierced the sky. They looked as solemn as the long spears of an army. A village girl dressed in flowery clothes was carrying a basket as she watched the carriages pass by. A cool breeze blew past, lifting the flowery cloth wrapped around her head, revealing an ordinary face and a pair of clear eyes. Fan Xian smiled at the girl named Hai Tang, and nodded imperceptibly to show his gratitude, as well as to express his goodwill. He knew that after going to Shangjing, northern Qi, he would inevitably have to deal with her again, and Chen Pingping had told him to find a way to get close to Ku He. Haitang was different from what Fan Xian had imagined when he was in the capital. She was not as beautiful as Xueqi, but she was more beautiful than Xueqi. The former beauty referred to her appearance, while the latter referred to her temperament. Fan Xian had always believed that there were no fairies in the world. If there were, then they must be female ghosts in disguise. Although Haitang had come to assassinate Xiao En, and had once wanted to kill Fan Xian still admired her. On the one hand, he admired the girl's powerful and natural strength. On the other hand, when Haitang had pointed at Fan Xian's nose like a shrew on the meadow, her country girl vibe had really made Fan Xian like her. The carriage stopped beside Fan Xian. He lifted the curtain and entered, not looking at the riverbank again. Crossing the river and through the forest, the convoy of carriages arrived on the official road under the protection of the Northern Qi army. Fan Xian sniffed the air and looked at the green trees on the side of the road. He felt a little strange. Had he left the country? How come he didn't feel anything at all? The formation on the official road was rather frightening. To the left and right of the convoy were two groups. One group was made up entirely of women. There were young maids, nimble middle-aged servants, and old gloomy nannies. The other group was made up of men, but they were even gloomier than the women. They wore embroidered robes and carried curved swords at their waists. Their bodies exuded a sinister aura. At least half of the people in the diplomatic mission were from the Overwatch Council of Qing. As soon as the convoy set out on the official road and saw the group of men with curved swords, a strong sense of hostility began to brew. Everyone's hands unconsciously touched the hilts of the straight swords at their waists. The Overwatch Council of Qing and the Brocade Guard of Northern Qi were the two most secretive and dangerous secret service organizations in the world. Over the past decade or so, the two sides had crossed swords countless times, both in the open and in the shadows. The battle between spies and counter-spies was always cruel and merciless. The hands of both sides had long since been stained with the blood of the other. Today, suddenly meeting on the official road, both sides began to smell the scent of the other, and their eyes began to turn red. The officials of Northern Qi hurriedly came forward to explain to Fan Xian. Fan Xian didn't mind. He waved his hand, telling his subordinates to relax a little. After all, today they had come for the sake of the friendship between the two countries separated by a strip of water. It was the 7 tiger guards behind him who kept their cool the whole time. They were indeed two neighboring countries separated by a strip of water, and the feeling was even more obvious as they passed through Wudu. Without waiting for a rest, Fan Xian immediately had his subordinates begin to arrange the handover ceremony. Wang Qinian was a little puzzled. Why don't we continue to hold Xiao En? Perhaps on the way to Shangjing, we can get some information out of him. He didn't know what secrets Xiao En held, but as Fan Xian's confidant, he naturally knew what Fan Xian wanted. Fan Xian shook his head and calmly said, "Forget it. It's not that convenient to travel with these Northern Qi spies. It's better to leave him to them, and we'll have less to worry about. If anything happens to Xiao En along the way, naturally Northern Qi will take responsibility. Would they dare not return Yan Bingyun to us?" Although he said this, Fan Xian still felt a little depressed. Once they entered Shangjing, Xiao En might not be able to keep his life under the pressure of Ku He's position. Even if Xiao En regained his power because of his relationship with Shang Shanhu, Fan Xian had no better way to pry open Xiao En's yellow, old, and tight-lipped mouth. The clanking of chains rang out, and Fan Xian watched coldly as the old man was helped out of the carriage. Both of Xiao En's legs were broken, so it was particularly difficult for him to get out of the carriage. His trousers at the knee gave off a faint, sweet smell of blood. Most of the brocade guards of Northern Qi were young men, and they had no idea what Xiao En looked like. But from folklore and from the mouths of the older members of the guard station, they knew that the current Northern Qi Secret Service had been single-handedly built by this pitiful old man, who could not even stand. In other words, this white-haired old man could be considered the founder of their group. A strange atmosphere pervaded the scene of the handover. The brocade guards of Northern Qi didn't know how to treat Xiao En. Should they treat him as a national hero? Or a remnant of the previous dynasty? Was he their ancestor, or was he a serious criminal that they had to watch out for in the future? After a moment of silence, the emotion that flowed through everyone's blood finally gained the upper hand. On the official road, the brocade guards dismounted in unison and half-knelt to the ground. They saluted the old man and said, "Greetings, Master Xiao." Following the loud salute, A valiant and familiar power seemed to return to Shaowen's body. He looked at his disciples on the official road and narrowed his eyes. His silver hair danced in the wind. His withered lips parted slightly, but he didn't say anything. He just waved his hand calmly. It was this wave that made Fan Xian, who was observing from behind, feel a chill in his heart. Shaowen straightened his body. His iron-like shoulders seemed to have regained the strength to bear the weight of the world. On the other side, the maids from Shangjing had long since boarded Sea Lily's carriage. No one knew how they had managed to carry so many ornaments and utensils with them, but Sea Lily was able to take a fragrant bath in the carriage. After a long time, the carriage door opened, and Sea Lily stepped out, stepping on a soft embroidered stool. Everyone's eyes brightened, but Fan Xian's eyes dimmed for a moment, then returned to normal. A pair of slender jade-like hands hung lightly outside the wide, light green sleeves. Her voluptuous curves were perfectly accentuated by her gorgeous clothes. Her black hair was lightly tied up, and she wore a simple ebony fork. Her red lips were a shade of vermilion, and her eyes were bright and clear. This was Sea Lily, the peerless beauty who had easily captured the heart of the emperor. Chapter 205. Wang Qinian glanced at Fan Xian, as if trying to find something strange on his face. After all, if Sea Lily were to leave, she would forever be in the palace, and the two of them would probably never see each other again. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian's face was still calm, and his eyes were as clear as a lake. He smiled and walked forward, bowing to Sea Lily through the crowd of women. Just as he was about to say something, a pair of disdainful eyes stared at him from the side. Fan Xian was a little annoyed. He turned his head and saw that it was an old nanny dressed in clothing that clearly had some status. Before he could speak, the old nanny spoke coldly and disdainfully. "Southern Qi official, Lady C has now set foot on our territory. She no longer needs to be reprimanded by you, right?" Fan Xian frowned, wondering where this was coming from. Then he heard the old woman whisper to herself in disdain, "This official of the southern court dares to stare at a young lady. He has no manners at all." This old nanny was an old member of the royal palace, and had always had a high status. When Sea Lily was a child living in the royal palace in Shangjing, northern Qi, she had served her. This time, the northern Qi emperor was heartbroken that Sea Lily had suffered in Qing, and was afraid that she had been wronged by Qing officials on the way here, so he had ordered the old nanny to come to the border and let Sea Lily recover. Fan Xian frowned again. Suddenly, he walked toward the carriage where Sea Lily was standing. The zhanqi in his body was tyrannical, and at this moment, he only released a little bit of it, but it was enough to make the women around him cry out and fall to the side, making a path for him. At the other end of the path was Sea Lily, who was sitting uneasily under the carriage. "What a rude fellow!" The old nanny was furious. "What do you want, you southern barbarian? Someone, kick this man out." Hearing this, the brocade guards and officials from northern Qi hurried over. A few of them were unprepared to draw their scimitars from their waists. The northern Qi official who received the diplomatic mission knew of Fan Xian's background. He was the son-in-law of the prime minister, the eldest son of the minister of state, the consort of the Qing emperor, and the immortal poet who had provoked northern Qi's Zhuang Mohan into vomiting blood. This was no ordinary official. In last year's battle, northern Qi had suffered consecutive defeats, and in this diplomatic agreement, they were the guilty party. How could they dare to be rude to such an important person? The official quickly dismissed the brocade guard. The old nanny was even angrier. She pointed at the official and scolded, "How can we allow these southern barbarians to act so presumptuously on our territory?" Relying on his time in the royal palace, Old Yu only knew the depths of Ho-Hai. How could he know the depths of the world? He gritted his worm-like teeth, puffed up his cheeks, and waved his withered palm toward Fan Xian's face. "Pah!" Fan Xian smiled and held the old nanny's wrist. He tilted his head to look at her. The old grandma felt her hair stand on end from the stare, but she still forced herself to say, "Let go. See if I don't slap you for real." Another smack. This time, it was the old nanny who had been slapped in the face. Her legs gave way, and she fell into the yellow dirt on the official road. The old woman covered her pained face and looked at Fan Xian in shock. Perhaps it had been many years since she had been hit, so after being hit, she was so shocked that she forgot to cry out in pain. Fan Xian pulled back his hand. He was disgusted by the old bark he had touched. He wiped it on his clothes and said quietly, "Since you say I am a southern barbarian, then I will show you." This slap made everyone feel dizzy. No one could have imagined that Commissioner Fan Xian, the immortal of poetry, would raise his hand against an old woman. The official quickly wiped away his sweat and explained, "She is an old member of the palace. Even the common officials have to give her some face." Fan Xian looked at the old woman, who was sitting on the ground and covering her mouth. He shook his head slightly and smiled. "I am not an official of Northern Qi, so I don't have to give her face. Don't say she's an old member of the palace. In my heart, she is a shameless old member of the palace." These words were far too arrogant. He didn't even care about the face of the Northern Qi palace. The official gritted his teeth and lowered his head. He knew that the situation was not in his favor. Even if Fan Xian had hit her, he couldn't say anything. Fan Xian walked directly to the side of the carriage through the empty path. No one dared to stop him now. He smiled and looked at Sea Lily. "Take care of yourself in the palace," he said quietly. Sea Lily curtsied slightly. The panic in her eyes had now been well concealed. She pursed her lips and replied lightly, "You have taken care of me on the way. I have nothing to repay you for your kindness. I am truly at a loss as to what to do." Fan Xian smiled. "What to do is good. Don't worry." With a few simple words, he had determined the future of Sea Lily's brother in the capital. Fan Xian silently retreated, standing far away in the middle of his envoys' carriages. He watched as the old man and woman, who had traveled with him for a long time, boarded Northern Qi's carriage. He narrowed his eyes and felt that something was strange. Northern Qi did not seem to treat this as a secret agreement. Logically speaking, Shaoan should have been secretly sent to Shangjing. With so many brocade guards present today, there was no way to hide it. If Shang Shanhu asked for Xiao En from the royal family of Northern Qi, how would the young emperor respond? Haitong's side was another opposing force. It seemed that the royal family of Northern Qi was in for a headache. Fan Xian was also curious about how Sea Lily was being treated. He could see that the emperor really liked her, otherwise he wouldn't have gone to such lengths to receive her. But even if Sea Lily was the granddaughter of the Qing prince, after all these years, she had long since lost her value. Could it be that the young emperor really believed in love? But wouldn't the Empress Dowager be angry at such a serious matter? How could Sea Lily enter the palace? The old man with the broken legs boarded the carriage in silence. Fan Xian couldn't help but sigh to himself. Shaoan had just gotten off the prisoner's carriage, and now he was in another. How could one carriage carry the 20 years of separation and the loss of freedom? After entering Northern Qi, the Black Knights quietly returned to their encampment near the capital. The safety of the envoy was left to the Northern Qi brocade guards and the troops along the way. Fan Xian had a rare moment of leisure, and he was quite content. In any case, they were on foreign soil. Even if they were given 800 times more courage, they wouldn't dare to do anything to the envoy. The trip was a pleasant one. Most of the people in the envoy were old people who had been to Northern Qi. Even Wang Qinian had done business between the two countries for free. The only ones who seemed excited about going abroad were Fan Xian and the 7 Tiger Guards. Although the Tiger Guards, led by Gao Da, still maintained the stern air that experts should maintain, one could tell from their incessant gazes that they were very interested in the foreign scenery. Fan Xian laughed. "We've opened our eyes to the foreign world. But the scenery of Northern Qi isn't much different from that of Qing. It's just that the trees are different. Even the temperature isn't cold. It's much warmer than the wastelands southwest of the Great Lake." Wang Qinian explained, "Although Northern Qi is in the northeast, the weather is actually quite good." Gao Da suddenly spoke in a low voice. Because he rarely spoke, Fan Xian was very interested. He said, "The scenery of Northern Qi is indeed good. My greatest wish in life is to follow His Majesty on his 4th northern expedition, to bring this territory under the jurisdiction of Qing, and to help His Majesty unify the world." The carriage rattled along the official road. Outside the window, the green leaves of the deciduous trees, large and small, swayed in the wind created by the carriage, as if they were shaking their heads and sighing. Fan Xian sighed. "On this beautiful spring day, let's talk less about fighting and killing." Although he said this, he still quietly explained all the things that they should pay attention to in Shangjing. This time, there was no need to negotiate. As for the implementation of last year's agreement, it shouldn't be too difficult, but there were some things that needed to be taken care of. Aside from Fan Xian, Wang Qinian, and Gao De, the only other person in the carriage was the deputy of the diplomatic mission, Master Lin Jing of the Chamberlain of Chamberlain. So there was nothing taboo about their conversation, as long as it wasn't overheard by the people of northern Qi outside. There was still a long way to go from Wudu to Shangjing. As the carriage traveled eastward day by day, Fan Xian's brows gradually furrowed. He was no longer in the mood to look at the dull scenery outside the carriage. In his heart, he was thinking, where should Xiaoen be at this time? And see Lily? Before she entered the palace, what kind of identity would the young emperor arrange for her? Chen Pingping's plan of white sleeves had already been secretly broken by Fan Xian. Would Fan Xian's plan of red sleeves come to fruition one day? Seeing that Fan Xian was not in a good mood, Lin Jing respectfully said, "Sir, although the diplomatic mission is safe, the journey is long and tiring. Please be patient, sir." He was well aware of Fan Xian's status. That day at Wudu, when he had slapped the old nanny, Lin Jing didn't think it was a big deal. Given Fan Xian's status and temper, in the capital of the kingdom of Qing, he would even dare to beat up the Guo family and guard Ye's only daughter, let alone a mere servant woman. He also knew that this diplomatic mission would be carried out according to Fan Xian's orders. He was just a minor character dealing with miscellaneous matters, so he was afraid that Fan Xian would be in a bad mood and cause trouble. He hurriedly said, "Shangjing is one of the most prosperous places in the world. The women there are more elegant than those on Lujing River in the capital. When the time comes, you should go and see." Chapter 206. Fan Xian smiled and shook his head, indicating that it wasn't because he couldn't bear the loneliness of the journey. He knew that ever since he often sat in Sea Lily's carriage, in the eyes of these people, he was probably inextricably linked to the word dissolute. After thinking for a moment, he suddenly opened his mouth and asked, "We've already walked for so many days. Furthermore, we've been traveling on official roads. Our speed is very fast. We should have already passed the distance from the border to Jingdo. Northern Qi's territory seems to be rather large." A strange silence fell over the carriage. After a long time, Ling Jing smiled and said, "Correct. Although the royal court seized a large piece of land from northern Qi last year, in terms of territory and population, northern Qi is still the largest country in the world. It's just that there's been constant internal strife, and the hearts of the people are divided. That's why they're no match for us." Fan Xian frowned slightly. If northern Qi could really rise to power, then the country he grew up in might be in trouble. As he thought this, he heard Gao De say in a low voice, "It seems that there's still a large territory waiting for us to conquer." Gao De was a man of few words. These past few days, after he was no longer in charge of escorting Xiaoen, he would often say a few short words, but they were extremely absurd and hilarious. Fan Xian couldn't help but laugh. The officials of the kingdom of Qing, under the influence of 20 years of victory, had indeed developed a terrifying self-confidence. Wang Qinian, on the other hand, laughed bitterly. "I say, Sir Gao, don't take away my role as a sidekick." Along the way, the diplomatic mission stopped at various relay stations in northern Qi. Very few of them stopped in the larger cities. Although the Qing diplomatic mission was somewhat displeased, seeing that the officials of the other side had carefully received them and served them attentively, they couldn't say anything. Everyone knew that northern Qi had lost a great deal of face by this agreement. Naturally, they would be too embarrassed to let the people of the country see the southern diplomatic mission swagger through the cities. But along the way, they would always meet some ordinary people. One day, Fan Xian asked a question he had been curious about for a long time. "Why do the people of northern Qi not seem to hate us? Why do they look at us with contempt and even pity? In the eyes of the people of northern Qi, we are still southern barbarians, uncivilized objects." Ling Jing smiled. As for the war between the two countries, the royal family of northern Qi has kept it a secret. Although the people of the north know that the kingdom of Qing is extremely powerful, they still look down on us. Fan Xian shook his head and sighed. "If you cover yourself with a black cloth, just pretend that you're not afraid of the dark." After all, northern Qi is the successor of northern Wei. They always think of themselves as the rightful ruler of the world, and naturally look down on other countries. This was the truth. Although the Northern Wei Empire had been destroyed 20 years ago, it was still the most powerful country in the world. It had cast its shadow over all the smaller countries in the surroundings. The might of the barbarians still remained in the hearts of the people of the north. Thus, they had always thought that Northern Qi still retained its former glory, and that they were still the people of the most powerful nation in the world. When they looked at other people, they would habitually lift their chin slightly and lower their gaze slightly, boasting, pitying, and respecting themselves. People were willing to live in the past. Of course, the officials of Northern Qi knew that the world had changed a long time ago. This could be seen from the way they treated the Qing envoys. There's one more important point. Ling Jing continued his analysis calmly. Northern Qi inherited most of Northern Wei's territory and officials, so all the scholars of the world regard Northern Qi as the rightful ruler. The path of literature lies in Northern Qi. This is not wrong. Every year during the spring examinations, Northern Qi's examinations are much more lively than ours. Not only do the scholars of Northern Qi gather in Shangjing, but even the scholars of Dongyi travel thousands of miles to Shangjing. Wang Qinian interrupted. That's right. Even many of the scholars of the Kingdom of Qing went to Shangjing to take part in the examinations a few years ago. Preposterous. Fan Xian laughed. Can people of Qing become officials of Northern Qi? Ling Jing smiled bitterly. Of course not. But it seems that the people of the world recognize this. So as long as a scholar can enter the top 3 in the Northern Qi examinations, no matter what country they are in, they have the right to be an official. Even our Kingdom of Qing is no exception. Sir, you were once a professor of the Imperial College. Surely you know of Xu Wu? Fan Xian nodded. Ling Jing sighed. Xu Wu the scholar took the examinations in Northern Qi. His teacher was Zhuang Mohan. That's why he calls himself Zhuang Mohan's student. Sir, think about it. Xu Wu the scholar clearly passed the imperial examinations in Northern Qi, and yet he was able to return to Qing to become an official. You can see that Northern Qi's literary style is flourishing. Fan Xian laughed and shook his head. No wonder His Majesty has been trying so hard to make a name for himself. It's probably because he can't stand this kind of vexation. Correct. When it comes to martial arts, no one can compare to our kingdom, Ling Jing said. It's just that when it comes to literature, there have never been any true talents. Literature is the end of the road, Fan Xian said. Ling Jing thought of something and laughed. Of course. Sir Commissioner, you appeared out of nowhere and provoked Northern Qi's Zhuang Mohan into vomiting blood. After that, I'm sure no one would dare say anything to our Kingdom of Qing. Wang Qinian repeatedly said yes, and Gouda also nodded. Although Fan Xian's rise in the capital did not necessarily make all the powers feel comfortable, on the level of the outside world, to be able to have another talent outside of the battlefield who could suppress Northern Qi's arrogance was presumably a situation that all the people of Qing wanted to see. This kind of boring journey without the company of beautiful women was boring. Fan Xian hoped it would end sooner. However, the long road seemed to have no end. The carriage's 4 wheels stirred up yellow dust, rising up on the wide road like a yellow dragon. However, it was firmly bound in the middle of the road by the 2 rows of trees on the side of the road, unable to leap out. It looked like it was pitifully struggling, twisting incessantly. The leaves of the trees that blocked the dust on both sides of the road varied in size, but overall, compared to the leaves of the Kingdom of Qing, they were much wider. The trunks were thick, and there were trees every few feet. Fan Xian stuck his head out of the carriage window and squinted. Facing the wind, he watched the trees flash past his eyes. For some reason, he thought of that world that he hadn't thought of in a long time. He still remembered many years ago, when he was on the train to Beijing, passing through Hebei. At that time, on both sides of the tracks, there were trees like this, and they were thrown backward in this boring manner. There was no dust at the window because Fan Xian, as the envoy, was sitting in the first carriage. Naturally, the ones who ate the dust were his pitiful subordinates and Northern Qi's reception officials. Without any warning, a black shadow appeared at the end of the road. It abruptly piled up on top of the gradually tapering line of trees. It looked somewhat frightening. Fan Xian thought it was a dark cloud and couldn't help but smile. Although he wasn't going to call for everyone to collect their clothes like he had done on the rooftop in Danzhou, he was going to remind the driver to put on a raincoat. The carriage gradually moved forward. Everyone finally saw the dark shadow clearly. At this moment, the clouds suddenly parted, as if to welcome guests from afar. They cast down the warm light of the spring sun, shining on the shadow. So, it was an enormous city. This city was even taller and more majestic than the capital of the kingdom of Qing. It was built with large pieces of limestone, and its 30-foot-tall walls were slightly slanted. But it still gave everyone who had come from afar an indescribable sense of oppression, as if the walls could crush them at any moment. There were still buildings with double eaves on the walls, perhaps used as corner towers. Soldiers were walking back and forth on the high walls, patrolling. A solemn and majestic feeling emanated from this huge city wall. The area in front of the city gate had long been cleared. There were no idle commoners lingering there. The relevant officials of northern Qi were waiting in the square for the arrival of the Qing diplomatic mission. On the official road, the carriage gradually slowed. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and pulled his head back from the window. He hadn't thought that the capital would appear in front of him in such a shocking manner. He wasn't prepared at all. They had arrived in Shangjing, northern Qi. The ceremonial music began, and both sides greeted each other. The northern Qi officials wore bright and luxurious clothing, while the Qing diplomatic mission was tired from the journey and couldn't help but look tired. Comparing the two, it was very obvious. Fan Xian calmly looked at all the complicated procedures in front of him. Only when it was time to introduce himself did he nod slightly in acknowledgement. In the eyes of the northern Qi people, this handsome young official was an arrogant little man, but Fan Xian didn't care at all what kind of impression he left on them. His attention was completely focused on the buildings of Shangjing, northern Qi. This enormous city had stood on this piece of land for who knew how many years and how much wind and rain it had weathered. The edges of the huge limestone had been weathered, but it still stubbornly maintained its hardness. Fan Xian felt a little emotional. His emotion was different from that of other travelers. He only felt that after coming to this world 17 or 18 years ago, he could finally touch upon the history of this world, even if it was only a remnant of history. Although the capital of the kingdom of Qing was also very large, everything seemed to have a certain freshness to it. Fan Xian knew that this smell was left behind by his mother, so he could see the ancient buildings today, and he felt a strange sense of vicissitudes. Chapter 207. Greetings, Commissioner. The one who interrupted Fan Xian's thoughts was the Qing envoy stationed in northern Qi, Master Lin Wan. Fan Xian looked away from the mottled walls. In this country, it would be better to call me Envoy Fan. Lin Wan was slightly taken aback. He had always been far away in a foreign country, so he did not know the details of what had happened in the capital. But he knew that Commissioner Fan was a popular figure in the court. He had not expected his first greeting to be rebuffed. Looking at Fan Xian's expression, Lin Wan could not help but think that this young official was relying on his father's influence and was pompous. He could not help but worry. Lin Jing smiled. Master Fan, what you mean is, since we are here to declare our friendship, we should not use the identity of the Overwatch Council, lest the other party be unhappy. Lin Wan finally understood. He smiled. As you wish, Master Fan. Fan Xian turned his head to look at the official stationed in northern Qi. His face was upright, but he looked somewhat familiar. He could not help but feel puzzled. Standing to the side, Lin Jing explained, Lord Lin Wan is this one's cousin. Fan Xian was enlightened. So that's how it is. Father and son go to war, and brothers fight tigers. With you two here, I believe this mission will go smoothly. A northern Qi official walked over, and the three of them stopped talking. They turned to study the marks on the walls of Shangjing and the routes the ants had taken. It was not until the official walked behind them that Lin Wan suddenly noticed him. Brother Wei Hua, you came today? He asked with surprise. Fan Xian turned and looked at the official named Wei Hua. He smiled. It was not convenient for him to say anything. Wei Hua cupped his hands in greeting. He seemed to be quite familiar with Lin Wan. If it were not for receiving your envoy, I'm afraid I would still be enjoying myself in Lixiang courtyard. Fan Xian was delighted. It seemed that this person was just like Li Hongqing. They both had the same taste. Lin Wan hurriedly introduced him to Fan Xian. This is Master Wei Hua, the junior minister of Honglu Temple. He then introduced Wei Hua. And this is... Unexpectedly, Wei Hua waved his hand with a faint smile. Master Fan is famous throughout the world. There is no need for Brother Lin to introduce him. Fan Xian was slightly taken aback. He cupped his hands. I do not deserve this title. Master Fan is too modest. Wei Hua's features could be considered delicate, but there was a sense of unruliness in his eyes. He didn't look like an official, but more like an arrogant scholar. A dignified immortal of poetry, unexpectedly became the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. Next year, I'm afraid he'll be in charge of the palace treasury of the Southern Court. Before he left for the diplomatic mission, he exposed the scandal of the spring examination, and the heads of 17 officials fell to the ground. But Master Fan, you've transferred to Northern Qi. He laughed and said, I wonder what the emperor of your country is thinking? For someone as important as Sir Fan, it is only natural that he should be kept in the capital. How could he be sent to suffer in the kingdom of Qi? What if we meet with a cold on the way? What should we do? Fan Xian heard the faint threat in his words but did not care. He smiled and said, How could I be so weak? Wei Hua noticed that this talented young official seemed to be very interested in Shangjing's walls. He couldn't help but proudly say, This city has been built for 300 years, and has never been attacked by an enemy. Does Master Fan think it is very grand? How does it compare to the capital of Qing? Fan Xian smiled and said, Of course it is grand, but it seems a bit old. It seems that your country needs to find a time to repair it. As the two men spoke, they secretly mocked each other. Everyone was silent. After a while Wei Hua said quietly, Master Fan, you have come from afar. Naturally, I must play host. After the official business is done, I hope you will do me the honor. Fan Xian looked at him and wondered why there was always a hint of enmity in his words, but this enmity did not reach the level of hatred. He couldn't help but be curious. He had never met this person before, so how had he offended him? Lin Wen laughed and said, Let Envoy Fan know that this Master Wei Hua is the eldest son of the Marquis of Chongningho, who went on a diplomatic mission to the Southern Court last year. Envoy Fan had a drinking contest in the palace last year, and the Marquis was unable to hold on and passed out. After returning home, he never forgot about it, saying that the Southern Court had produced a powerful young man. Not only was he good at poetry, but his capacity for liquor was also astonishing. Master Wei Hua often listened, and naturally wanted to compete with you. So that's how it is. Fan Xian laughed bitterly and looked at Master Wei Hua again. Sure enough, he saw some similarities between him and Chong Ningho. Last year, he had been the deputy to receive the Northern Qi diplomatic mission, and had come into contact with Chong Ningho quite a bit. Later, during the palace banquet, they had a good drinking contest, and could be considered half a drinking buddy. He couldn't help but clasp his hands together and say, Brother Wei, if you want to avenge your father, you'll have to wait a few days. Otherwise, if I get drunk and become muddle-headed, it won't be easy to explain to His Majesty. Everyone laughed and left the matter for another day. Shangjing, Northern Qi, was indeed bustling. Although the streets were not wide, there were restaurants and restaurants along the way, with green tiles and pale walls and tall trees. The scenery was beautiful, and the people on the streets smiled warmly, full of confidence and pride. It did not look like a defeated country at all. The diplomatic mission was received by Wei Hua, and they headed west of the city. They were arranged to stay in the royal courtyard behind Honglu Temple. From this arrangement, it could be seen that the Emperor of Northern Qi was giving the Qing diplomatic mission enough face. Along the way, Fan Xian chatted with Wei Hua, and found that he was very familiar with the Qing bureaucracy. Not only could he name some of the nobles, but judging by his tone of voice, it seemed that he was acquainted with Crown Prince Jing, Li Hongqing. This surprised Fan Xian. The capital of the two countries was far from each other, and Fan Xian didn't know how they had met. During their conversation, Fan Xian had a vague understanding of Northern Qi's current state of affairs. Of course, before he went north, he had already read countless files in the Overwatch Council. He knew that the Northern Qi court was far from as harmonious and brilliant as Wei Hua had described it to be. The Empress Dowager of Northern Qi was only in her 30s, and was still young. The emperor had not been in power for long, and could not completely control the court. The emperor's faction and the empress's faction each had their own faction in the court, and they were fighting silently. If it weren't for the fact that the two countries had fought last year, and Northern Qi's complete defeat had temporarily suppressed the conflict, Shangjing would probably be in chaos by now. And Shang Shanhu was originally a great general in the north, and it was for this reason that he had been transferred back to Shangjing. Fan Xian pretended to ask casually, I hear that General Shang Shanhu is a great hero. Brother Wei, when are you free to take me to pay him a visit? Wei Hua was surprised. Master Fan, you are interested in General Shang Shanhu? Although I am not a weak scholar, I have always admired heroes who resisted the barbarians. Fan Xian smiled warmly. Wei Hua's expression changed. It seemed that he did not want to talk about Shang Shanhu. Fan Xian saw his expression and didn't say anything more. He smiled slightly. When the diplomatic mission arrived at the courtyard, there were people responsible for arranging their accommodations. After a while, everything was finally arranged. As the vice minister of the office of the Grand Herald, Wei Hua naturally had to arrange dinner. At the banquet, he tested Fan Xian's tolerance for alcohol, and found that this young official drank wine like it was water. He was a perfect example of the true meaning of the word drink. He couldn't help but be shocked, and immediately gave up on the idea of drinking to avenge his father. The banquet dispersed, and the only people left in the courtyard were the diplomatic mission's own people. The guards of Northern Qi were very courteous and only stood guard outside the gate, leaving all matters of the inner courtyard to the diplomatic mission to handle. There were only 5 people in the room. Fan Xian, the 2 brothers Lin Wen and Lin Jing, Gao De, and Wang Qinian. Fan Xian closed his eyes for a long time, making sure that no one was eavesdropping. Then he said quietly, We are in the heart of an enemy country. Be careful what you say and do. The 2 brothers, Lin Wen and Lin Jing, were indeed rather quiet. They nodded slightly in agreement, but seeing that Wang Qinian and Gao De seemed to be Fan Xian's confidants, they probably did not know much about the current situation in Northern Qi. Lin Wen thought for a moment, then slowly opened his mouth to report the recent situation in Shangjing to Fan Xian. Shang Shanhu has an idle post? Fan Xian frowned. This was completely different from what he had expected. The Overwatch Council had originally thought that Northern Qi's most capable general, since he had been transferred south from the snowy wastelands, must have been to deal with Qing's aggressive attacks. How did he become an idle post? Great General Hua Yuan. Although his name sounds good, he is in the capital, and he only has 100 private soldiers. In the capital there is the Shangjing garrison, the 3 commanders, and the general of the cavalry. Great General Hua Yuan has an extra word, and his position is respected, but he has no soldiers in his hands. Even if Shang Shanhu has the bravery of the world, he can only obediently sit on the floor, holding the concubine and sighing. Lin Wen said with a trace of mockery, A tiger is raised in a cage. No matter how powerful it is, it can only scare people. Fan Xian lightly knocked on the table, and shook his head in confusion. What are they doing? Moving this guy back to the capital, and not letting him go to war, and keeping him like this, does Northern Qi have too much money and nowhere to spend it? Lin Wen sighed. In the struggle between the Emperor and Empress of Northern Qi, everyone wants to win Shang Shanhu's support, but everyone is afraid that Shang Shanhu will completely fall to the other side. So for now, they can only put him aside. But Shang Shanhu's name is here, and his rallying power in the military is too strong. Even if he only has 100 personal guards in the capital, no one would dare to look down on him. Fan Xian shook his head and sighed. No wonder only a few private soldiers came to Wudu. I was wondering. Helping Xiao En escape was such a big thing, and Shang Shanhu would not be so careless. Lin Wen was startled. He did not know what had happened to the diplomatic mission on the way. Lin Jing quickly explained in a low voice. Lin Wen was shocked. Seeing that Fan Xian did not seem to be injured, he relaxed. What is the relationship between General Shang Shanhu and Xiao En? Fan Xian fell silent. After a while he said quietly, If the council's judgment is correct, Shang Shanhu should be an orphan that Xiao En adopted. Chapter 208. An adopted orphan? Everyone was shocked. Fan Xian replied calmly, But it was a long time ago. After Xiao En was captured, Northern Wei was destroyed, and the world was thrown into chaos. It was then that Shang Shanhu emerged. The Overwatch Council had other evidence, or else they wouldn't have come to this conclusion. But Fan Xian's mission to the north was to confirm Shang Shanhu's master. No wonder Shang Shanhu was in such a hurry to rescue Xiao En. This is a big problem for the northern Qi court. Fan Xian stopped abruptly and frowned. Hai Tang wanted Xiao En dead, the emperor wanted to force Xiao En to reveal the location of the temple, and Shang Shanhu simply wanted the old man to have a happy old age. The three most powerful forces in northern Qi, because of Xiao En, had split into three completely different forces. There was going to be a good show to watch. Of course, Fan Xian also wanted to know the secret of the temple, so he couldn't just be a spectator. It was getting late, and everyone was tired from the journey, so they began to make arrangements for their rest. As for the next day's arrangements, the relevant officials had already drawn up the rules. Lin Wen only selected a few important matters to report to Fan Xian. The most important thing the next day was to enter the palace and meet with the emperor, and then to negotiate the exchange of prisoners at the office of the Grand Herald. Fan Xian thought for a moment and said, "We'll enter the palace in the morning. As for the office of the Grand Herald in the afternoon, I'll have to trouble you." He turned to Ling Jing. "Sir." Ling Jing looked at Fan Xian, puzzled. This was an important occasion for the exchange of prisoners and tribute. How could the envoy not be present? Fan Xian lowered his eyelids and said quietly, "I have more important matters to attend to." The prisoner exchange agreement had two pieces of paper, one white and one black. Fan Xian valued the black piece more. He had already handed over Xiao En and Si Lily, so he had to confirm Yan Bingyun's whereabouts immediately. Fan Xian sat in the carriage on the way to the northern Qi palace, yawning endlessly. He was not a pampered person who chose his bed, but he had not slept well last night. Looking at Gao Da and Wang Qinian beside him, they seemed to be tired as well. It was not hard to imagine that the entire diplomatic mission had suffered from insomnia. Last night, just as they were about to rest in peace, Wei Hua of the Chamberlain of Honglu Temple came again. Although he did not enter the rear courtyard, a number of singers and beauties, carrying with them a fragrant wind, ran into the rooms of the Qing officials. For a moment, everyone cried out in alarm. How could Fan Xian have known that northern Qi had such a custom? He was shocked. Although the girl kneeling at the foot of the bed was beautiful, and her large watery eyes were extremely alluring, Fan Xian could not bring himself to do something so absurd on his first day in Shangjing. He had no choice but to ask her to leave. Naturally, not many people were able to sleep well after the commotion. However, a songstress entered Ling Jing's room and didn't come out. During breakfast, Fan Xian noticed that Ling Jing didn't look too good. Ling Jing was a little surprised and explained with a smile. Even when the Northern Qi diplomatic mission went to the capital, the Chamberlain of Honglu Temple had arranged it this way. Fan Xian wiped the corners of his eyes and found that they were a little sticky. He then looked at Wei Hua, who was 100 times more energetic than before, and couldn't help but curse in his heart. He guessed that Wei Hua was probably doing this on purpose. Going on a diplomatic mission was actually similar to going on a business trip in his previous life. This was what Fan Xian thought. The carriage moved very steadily. He greedily opened the window and looked at the scenery on the street. It was not easy to come to Shangjing in northern Qi. He hadn't even caught a glimpse of the street, and now he was going to the palace to kowtow. It really was not a good feeling. Getting off the carriage and entering the palace, he put on a smile and gently rubbed his hands together. Stepping into the deep doorway, he suddenly saw a bright light. In the light were layers of eaves and tens of thousands of palaces. Most of the buildings in the palace were black. Amidst the solemnity, there was a hint of freshness and antiquity. Fan Xian paused and looked at the palace in front of him. It was like when he had first arrived in Shangjing, and he was a little absent-minded. The palace of northern Qi was very different from that of the kingdom of Qing. It did not triumph in its vastness. Instead, it was layered, beautiful, and tranquil. It was as if every jet-black pillar was telling the story of what had happened in the palace, and every long wooden corridor was telling visitors how many great figures of ancient times had walked lightly through it. The diplomatic mission fell silent. Because the 7 tiger guards were carrying long knives, they naturally could not enter the palace, so they stayed outside. Beside Fan Xian, other than Lin Wen, Ling Jing, and Wang Qinian, were the necessary officials of the Ministry of Rites. After walking for some time, passing through long corridors and flowing water, they gradually ascended and finally arrived at the main hall of the Northern Qi Palace. In front of the hall, the palace guard stood solemnly. Their expressions were firm and determined. At a glance, one could tell that they were at least 7th-level masters. Outside the heavy wooden doors, the head eunuch was waiting, his body hunched. Everyone walked quietly to the front of the hall. The head eunuch opened his eyes and looked weakly at the southern barbarians. With a shake of the horsetail whisk in his hand, he shouted in a croaky voice, "The envoy of Qing has arrived." The eunuch's voice was not loud, but the 2 wooden doors behind him slowly opened, revealing to the visitors the true face of the northern center of power in the continent. The main hall of the Northern Qi Palace was extremely spacious, and the space inside was enormous. The space between the eaves was made of extremely expensive glass, so sunlight shone into the hall without any cover. It blew away the usual gloomy smell of the palace, leaving it bright and cool. The 2 sides of the palace were supported by columns made of an unknown material. The top of the columns was painted black and decorated with golden patterns. On each column was a picture of a coiled dragon soaring into the clouds. It looked extremely exquisite. Behind the columns were layers of gauze, and behind them were faint figures. It was unclear whether they were palace maids or eunuchs. Entering the hall, the first thing that caught Fan Xian's eyes and left a deep impression on him was the long straight path in front of the door. On both sides of the path were 2 pools of clear water. Led by the eunuchs, the envoy slowly walked along the straight path. The Qing officials who entered the palace for the first time were just as shocked as Fan Xian. The straight path beneath their feet was made of green jade. It was covered with a luxurious carpet, and the soles of their feet felt unusually gentle. And the clear water on both sides of the path was even more surprising. In such a large palace, there were actually 2 pools. The water was crystal clear, and golden fish swam freely in the water. If one's eyes were sharp enough, like Fan Xian's, they could see that in the deepest part of the pool, there were 2 large fish, one black and one white. They were gracefully swaying their tails as they lay on the white sand. Deputy Lin Jing looked at the scene in front of him and couldn't help but sigh to himself. Such a luxurious palace is enough to show what kind of national power and wealth Northern Qi had after inheriting the property of Northern Wei. It is a pity that it is precisely because of the luxury of the royal family that Northern Qi has become decadent and weak, and that is why they have been defeated year after year. Behind the long path was the court of Northern Qi's officials. Behind them, the water rippled, and a light breeze rose from the hall. The floor was paved with sandalwood, and it was a solemn scene. High up in front of them was the dragon throne. The Emperor of Northern Qi was looking at the approaching foreign envoys with great interest. The envoy knelt on the floor and paid his respects to the enemy's emperor, saying, "Long live the emperor. You may rise." The Emperor of Northern Qi smiled. It seemed that having the Qing officials kneel at his feet was a very comfortable thing. Fan Xian breathed a sigh of relief and stood up. He found a pair of eyes on his face. Surprised, he looked back and saw that the young emperor on the dragon throne was looking at him with a somewhat ambiguous gaze. This young emperor of Northern Qi had only been in power for 2 years. He was only 17 years old, the same age as Fan Xian. His teacher in literature was the second son of Zhuang Mohan, and his teacher in martial arts was the eldest disciple of imperial advisor Ku He. As a result, he was neither accomplished in literature nor martial arts. This man was not interested in women. Similar to the Emperor of Qing, he was somewhat playful. He respected, feared, and angered the Empress Dowager, and rewarded his officials more than he punished them. This young emperor seemed to believe in such things as love. This was the first information that came to Fan Xian's mind when he saw the somewhat childish face of the emperor. But he immediately realized that he had been rude. When the ruler of a country looked at him, as an official, there was no reason for him to meet the other's gaze. So he hurriedly lowered his head slightly and stood to the side in silence. In his heart, he was puzzled by the ambiguous gaze he had seen earlier. Beside him, Ling Jing's forceful voice rang out. As the deputy envoy, he had unwillingly shouldered all the complicated formalities and official duties in light of Fan Xian's extreme laziness. He was reading the letter of credence that the Emperor of Qing had personally drafted. Fan Xian listened to him casually. He knew that it was nothing more than pompous words. The friendship between the 2 countries would last forever, and they would be brothers for generations. These lies could not even fool Dong Er, who sold tofu in Danzhou. Yet, they had to be read out so seriously. Sure enough, the young Emperor of Qi was nodding his head slightly, expressing his approval of his counterpart in the south. Fan Xian laughed in his heart, but his face maintained a respectful and self-restrained smile. It seemed that he was already reveling in the friendly atmosphere between the two countries. Soon after, the officials from the Board of Rights of Northern Qi stepped forward and, as usual, began to babble in beautiful language. This matter had finally come to a preliminary conclusion. But Fan Xian still felt very uncomfortable. At this moment, he discovered that, in addition to the young emperor, there were many more pairs of eyes looking at him. No matter how calm he was, he began to feel puzzled. In fact, it was the officials of Northern Qi who were puzzled. Everyone knew that the envoy from the south was the immortal poet Fan Xian, so they were all very interested in what kind of outstanding young man could make the great Zhuang Mohan return home dejectedly. Today in the palace hall, this Fan Xian had not opened his mouth. Even something as important as reading the letter of credence had been handed over to the deputy envoy. The officials could not help but become even more interested in this incomparably handsome young celebrity. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.